It's been 3 days since I buried my father, Ryan Luika. I've been running around like crazy trying to handle everything he left behind. And honestly, it's a mess. I'm now the Baron of Luika territory, but there's nothing grand about it. The land is poor, food is scarce, and no merchants want to come here because there's nothing worth trading. We have some mineral veins, but they're too difficult to develop. On top of that, the kingdom of Norrance is full of hot-blooded warriors, and bandits roam the borders freely. I can't afford soldiers, so there's no security. No security means no money. No money means no soldiers. It's a vicious cycle. I put down my quill pen and sighed. Normally a baron would have an administrator to help with all this paperwork, but we're too broke to hire one. My father's funeral cost me my last gold coin. But not everything is bad. I have a secret. I'm actually someone from Earth who crossed over into this world, and I have a special ability. Young master, please have some tea. That's Yahello, my personal maid. She's been by my side since we were both little. She set down the tea, her white skirt swaying gently. She's grown up quite nicely, I have to admit. If I wanted, she could warm my bed any time. Then a panel appeared before my eyes, something only I can see. Yahello, Martial, 10, Strategy, 73, Loyalty, 100. No special talents. Rating, C. This panel is my cheat ability. This world has magic and alchemy, but nobody has ever recorded anything like a game-style status screen. Martial strength means physical power and agility. Strategy means intelligence and magical affinity. And loyalty, well, Yahello's is maxed out at 100. She's completely devoted to me. I took a sip of the red tea. Even with everything falling apart, the taste reminded me, noble life does have its perks. Young master, are you all right? Yahello asked softly. Everyone else in the territory calls me, my lord, now, but she still calls me, young master, same as always. She knows how bad things are. If we can't pay our soldiers soon, even our last 100-man guard unit will disband. I'm fine, I told her. I do have a father-in-law of sorts, Baron Fedra, who rules the neighboring territory. I've met him many times and always called him uncle. He was always smiling, always telling me to come to him if I ever needed help. But now that my father is dead, I'm not sure how much that old kindness is still worth. I won't put too much hope on him. Then I remembered the warehouse. The place where every generation of Luika family heads stored their belongings. Maybe there's something valuable in there. The warehouse was covered in cobwebs and full of junk. Paintings, vases, things past family heads bought at high prices from merchants to look refined. Most of it was worthless. A famous painting, bought for 50 gold coins, would be lucky to sell for 10 silver. Nobility is all about appearances, and appearances depend on status, not taste. I quietly looked down on my ancestors' spending habits. I pulled out a fancy noble sword, but it was rusted through. All show, no substance. I tossed it aside and picked up a dusty box instead. It had a silver-gray eagle engraved on it. Something about it felt familiar. Inside was a heavy golden medallion, a gladiator's crest, beautifully carved with a golden eagle. Now this was actually exciting. Norrance is a kingdom that worships strength. Every year they hold a grand tournament. Nobles, commoners, even other races come to watch, though only legal citizens of Norrance can compete. The winner earns this crest, and with it comes free services at any small shop in the kingdom, the best discounts at major trading houses, and most importantly, the right to ask the king himself for one reasonable favor. This was easily the most valuable thing in my entire warehouse. My grandfather Edward had won it. He was once the greatest sword saint in the empire, though in this age where battle aura has declined, that title doesn't carry much weight anymore. He died in battle years ago, and my father inherited the barony at 16, just like me now. I shuddered at the thought. Are all Luika men destined to die young? I silently swore to have children later rather than sooner. The free services and discounts were only for the original owner, so those perks died with grandfather. What remains is its display value, and that one favor from the king. Honestly, if this crest could get me 1,000 gold coins, I'd hand it over without a second thought. Other nobles treat these as sacred honors. But I'm about to lose my last squad of guards because I can't pay them. Honor doesn't fill stomachs. Butler, prepare the carriage. The old butler came hurrying over. He saw the box in my hand, and immediately recognized Grandfather Edward's crest. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but in the end, he just nodded. "Yes, my lord. I'll have the carriage ready at once." Before leaving for the royal capital, Yahello fussed over my formal outfit, smoothing out every last wrinkle with her small pale hands. She carefully placed the noble top hat on my head, and I caught a whiff of her pleasant scent as she leaned close. Let's just say the soft contact was a nice bonus. I gave the butler his instructions. This trip to the capital would take at least 2 or 3 weeks. It's quite a distance from here. I climbed into the carriage marked with the Luika family crest. Yahello came along, of course. She's my personal maid. She goes wherever I go. On the way to the capital, we'd pass through Fedra territory. That was actually my first stop. If Baron Fedra would help me out, maybe I wouldn't need to give up Grandfather's crest. I'm not sentimental about it, but keeping a family heirloom would be nice if I could manage it. The Kingdom of Norrance has vast land but poor soil. Not much grows here, but the kingdom is rich in minerals. The neighboring kingdoms of Yade and Rima regularly import or from Norrance, at least when there's nowhere going on. Crossing from my territory into Fedra's land, the difference was obvious. It was still modest, but Baron Fedra had dry fields and orchards. For a baron, that's practically wealthy. Along the country roads I could see scattered farmers and the occasional traveling merchant with a donkey or old horse. We arrived safely at the Fedra manor. I sent my driver Oxiu ahead to announce my visit. Showing up unannounced is a bit rude among nobles, but our families had a decent relationship when my father was alive. I figured they wouldn't turn me away. I was wrong. Oxiu came back looking uncomfortable, eyes darting around. "What happened?" I asked, already guessing. "My lord, the butler threw me out," Oxiu stammered. "He said I was pretending to be a noble's driver." Yahello was furious. "Fedra's butler knows exactly who Oxiu is. He drove for your father plenty of times." I stayed calm. I understood immediately. They simply didn't want to see me. I'd underestimated how fast people cool off once someone dies. "Let's go, Oxiu. On to the capital." I didn't say anything more. That butler wouldn't dare refuse a baron's visit without his master's approval. Even my driver represents the face of Luika territory. This was a deliberate insult. Yahello barely spoke for the rest of the ride. She was seething. In her mind, Baron Fedra's daughter was engaged to me, and yet they wouldn't even let us through the door. It was a slap in my face, and she took it personally. As we traveled further toward the capital, the villages and territories grew more prosperous. By the time we reached the royal city, there were tall stone walls and wide paved roads. The difference from our muddy country lanes was staggering. Buildings of all sizes filled the city. After passing through the gate guard's inspection, we made it to the side hall of the royal palace. The clerk at the registration desk glanced at me and noticed my baron's badge. A mere baron wanting to see the king. Normally, they'd find every excuse to brush you off. Name: Linwei Luika. Purpose: an audience with His Majesty. Reason: I pulled out the gladiator's crest. The golden eagle made the clerk's eyes go wide. A gladiator's crest. Esteemed baron, how may I help you? His tone flipped completely. Anyone holding a golden eagle gladiator's crest had to be connected to a powerful noble house. The tournament is the biggest event in all of Norrance. Only one crest is awarded per year, and since the kingdom's founding, only a few hundred have ever been given out. I'd like an audience with His Majesty. Of course. I'll notify him at once. Please wait. No more pointless questions. The clerk was back in just minutes. I hadn't even finished my tea. Esteemed baron, His Majesty awaits you in the side hall. I nodded and left Yahello behind. Bringing a maid before the king would be extremely disrespectful. This was my first time seeing the ruler of Norrance up close. He wasn't as young as I'd imagined. A dignified, middle-aged man sat on the throne, golden hair partly hidden beneath his crown. His sharp eyes settled on me. "So, Baron Luika, you've come to me with a golden eagle gladiator's crest. What is it you need?" Only a handful of barons in history had ever held one of these crests. Most belonged to royalty or powerful noble houses. This one had been issued by the king's own father. I dropped to one knee, performed a proper noble salute, and said respectfully, "Your Majesty, I wish to exchange this crest for one capable person and a small amount of gold." King Zaluk XIII looked a bit surprised, but he replied, "You may go to the kingdom's reserve knight order and select one trainee royal knight. Additionally, I will pay you 1,000 Norrens gold coins to reclaim this eagle. The royal knight order answers directly to the king. The reserve knights here are elite talents gathered from across the kingdom. Quite a few are second sons of noble families looking to build their reputations. That's how things work here. Only the eldest son inherits. The rest lose their noble titles when they come of age and have to earn their own way. Some join merchant guilds or adventurer guilds if their family has enough resources. The unlucky ones just become commoners again. Honestly, I'm grateful for my situation. My father only had me, so I inherited the barony easily enough. A poor territory is still better than no territory at all. As for my mother, I've never seen her, not even in my earliest memories. When the knight commander brought me to the training grounds, I could feel the tension. The trainees took one look at me and realized I was just a baron. Following a baron versus following a duke, that's a world of difference. Some looked scared, some looked disgusted, and a few actually hid behind their companions. I didn't care. With King Ziluk XIII's personal authorization, I could take even an earl's second son if I wanted to. Not that I would. I have to admit, these Royal Reserve Knights had impressive stats. I looked through them one by one. Rambo, Martial, 74, Strategy, 40, Loyalty, 0. Rating, A-. Talents, Spear Mastery, One-Handed Sword Mastery. Arc, Martial, 68, Strategy, 56, Loyalty, 0. Rating, B. Talents, Eagle Eye, Longbow Mastery, Incredible Arm Strength. They were all skilled in their own ways, and the ratings were fairly close. These things can improve with training anyway. Then I stopped in front of one knight. Norrell, Martial, 96, Strategy, 80, Loyalty, 0. Rating, A. Talents, Horse Training, Eagle Eye, Weapon Mastery, Warrior. Norrell's stats were outstanding, far above the rest, even better than the noble-born second sons. He looked back at me calmly. I could tell he was ambitious, but his common birth meant he'd been deliberately holding back in tests so he wouldn't outshine the noble family's children. I said. The knight commander walked over. Norrell, starting today, you've graduated from the Knight Order. You'll serve under Baron Linway. Norrell's expression didn't change. He put his fist to his chest and bowed. Yes, Commander. What I didn't know was that Norrell wasn't actually unhappy about this. He'd already figured out his own plan. A baron's territory is usually on the kingdom's border, where bandits are constant and wars hit first. If he could get command of a guard unit under me, he'd have plenty of chances to earn military merit. Sure, most of the credit would go to me as the noble, but if he could build his reputation and win a gladiator tournament, becoming a commoner noble wasn't out of reach. He had his own reasons for needing that title. Sitting in the carriage, I was busy figuring out how to spend the gold. A bag of 1,000 Norrens gold coins sat in the corner. I needed to pay my soldiers their overdue wages immediately. That would cost several dozen coins. Then I was thinking of spending 500 on iron weapons. That's when Yahello spoke up. Young master, shouldn't we hire a blacksmith instead? It hit me instantly. Training my own blacksmith would save a fortune in the long run. Iron goods are expensive in Norrens. A basic iron sword costs about 1 gold coin. Adding chainmail and a shield, it's about 10 gold to equip a single soldier. And that only gets you something barely above a conscripted peasant. This is a magical continent. In a real war, soldiers at that level aren't even cannon fodder. The powerful nobles have massive heavy cavalry forces, and beyond that there are griffin riders, magical units, even alchemical construct armies. Those are trump cards that cost mountains of gold. Training a blacksmith isn't easy either. Talent makes all the difference. The good news is my ability lets me spot people with special talents. The bad news is my gold wouldn't even cover hiring a decent blacksmith, let alone anything fancy. Meanwhile, the news that the royal family bought a golden eagle gladiator's crest from me spread quickly. It reached Baron Fedra soon enough. He sipped his tea comfortably and stroked his mustache. The whole reason he'd been friendly with my father was because of grandfather's gladiator crest. My father Ryan was a strong fighter, and Fedra used him, having Ryan train his soldiers, sending Ryan to fight bandits on the front lines. The Luika family were military people. The Fedra family were merchants. Fedra had hundreds of light cavalry and nearly 1,000 guards. We couldn't even afford to feed ours. The engagement between me and Fedra's daughter Lena? That happened on impulse after my father rescued Fedra from some crisis years ago. Now that my father was dead, Fedra saw me as a bad investment. A merchant doesn't continue a deal he knows will lose money. I watched from the shadows while Norrell handed out wages to my guard soldiers. I checked every single one of them with my ability. Marshall, 20, strategy, 18, rating, E-. Hanson, Marshall, 23, strategy, 10, rating, E-. And on and on. Every single one was terrible. Low stats across the board, and their loyalty was pathetically low too. The kind of soldiers who'd run the moment things got ugly on a battlefield. I could see Norrell's face wasn't looking great either. The thought of leading these men clearly gave him a headache. And the territory was even worse than he'd expected. Crumbling walls, chipped blades, dull spears. Most of the men couldn't even afford a proper set of leather armor, let alone chainmail. If he had to take this bunch against real bandits, he'd probably give up on his dream of becoming a commoner noble right then and there. After paying everyone, Norrell came to find me. My lord. He hesitated, clearly struggling with how to say what he was thinking. Norrell, I know what you want to say. I cut in. This is the last squad of soldiers in the territory. From now on, they're under your full command. Don't slack on the training. He seemed surprised I handed over authority so quickly. But even with good training, it would take at least a month to whip them into any kind of shape. What about weapons? He asked. Fair point. Training means nothing without equipment. Properly arming a decent guard force would cost thousands of gold coins. And looking at me, he clearly doubted I had that kind of money. I'll have equipment for you in 1 month, I told him. Until then, focus on training. He didn't fully believe me, but I was his lord, so he just nodded and went along with it. Honestly, I had no idea how I was going to keep that promise. I checked the local population, and almost everyone was just ordinary laborers. Miners and hunters with no education and worthless stats. I let out a heavy sigh. Yahello set a cup of tea on my desk. Young master, you're not happy? She always notices my moods. I'd just gotten 1,000 gold coins and a talented knight. So why was I still upset? It's nothing, I said. Oh, by the way, she added, I heard a group of slave traders arrived in the territory today. Maybe they have someone useful? I looked at her, surprised. Lulu, how did you know I needed skilled people? She grinned. Because buying ready-made weapons is expensive. If we had our own blacksmith, we'd save a lot of money. The soldiers' weapons are falling apart, and you're short on gold, right? With a strategy score of 73, she was sharper than most of those reserve knights back at the capital. She'd noticed the soldiers' equipment problems just from being at my side today. Smart girl. Slave traders passing through Luika territory wasn't unusual. Most were foreign merchants from the kingdoms of Yade or Rima, heading deeper into Norrance to do business. I went to meet the trader, a thin, neatly dressed middle-aged man. He eyed me and Yahello behind me with a fawning smile. I could tell he was already appraising Yahello like merchandise. That bothered me, and he noticed my displeasure quickly enough. He didn't want trouble with a local lord on his own turf. He led me to a row of 6 large carriages covered in black cloth. What kind of slave are you looking for, Baron? Combat type? Companion type? Any preference on race? I ignored his sales tricks. Most vain nobles would jump at one of those categories, both of which would cost a premium. But I wasn't biting. Show me your regular slaves. No preference on race. He looked a bit disappointed, but led me to the 3rd carriage. When he pulled back the cloth, a group of girls flinched like frightened kittens. Actually, they were part cat, mixed blood with features of the Naze tribe. I scanned them. Nanasi, Marshall, 7, strategy, 40, rating, D. Talent, night vision. Aquina, Marshall, 40, strategy, 40, rating, C. Talent, beast taming. She had fierce wild eyes, staring at me with defiance and barely contained anger. But the slave collar around her neck wasn't something she could ever break free from. Decent, but not what I needed. I was looking for someone with a blacksmith's talent. My funds were too limited to spend on anything else. Then I noticed a figure curled up in the corner of the cage. Saruka, Marshall, 5, strategy, 99, rating, A. Talents, magic affinity, wisdom blessing, well-traveled. My heart skipped a beat. Her combat ability was basically 0, but that strategy score, 99? That was absurdly high. I was very, very interested. Even though I had my eye on the cat girl curled up in the corner, Saruka. I kept my face completely blank. How much for these slaves? I asked casually. The thin merchant smiled. 10 Norrens gold coins each, Baron. Buy 3 and I'll give you 20% off. He held up 3 fingers with a pained expression, like the discount was killing him. I pretended to hesitate, but inside I was already celebrating. Most of these cat girls were underage, skinny, and sickly. No normal buyer would want them unless they had weird tastes. They weren't worth anywhere near 10 gold. Forget it, I'll pass, I said, waving my hand. The merchant panicked and changed his tune immediately. Tell you what, buy 1, get 1 free. Consider it a friendship deal. Now I was really happy. I put on a reluctant face. Well, fine. I pointed at Aquina first. Among all the cat girls, she looked the healthiest and had the best appearance. The merchant nodded knowingly. Of course the Baron picks the pretty one. Then I pointed at Saruka in the corner. The merchant's face smoothed out in surprise. Saruka hadn't eaten in 2 days and looked like she was about to die. If I hadn't bought her, he'd probably have just disposed of her. He made a killing on this deal regardless. He'd bought these cat girls from border soldiers for 1 silver coin each, and now he was getting 100 times that in profit. After the sale, the merchant got friendlier. Anything else you need, Baron? I swear by the goddess of light, these slaves are completely loyal. They'll never rebel. I chuckled to myself. Of course they won't. The slave collars blow their heads off if they try. Got any dwarves? I asked. Everyone knows dwarves are the best smiths on this continent. If he had dwarves, there was a good chance I'd find a blacksmith. He nodded and pulled the cloth off another carriage. Inside were several dwarves lying around, looking just as rough as the cat girls. Their stats were a bit higher, though, and most of them actually had the blacksmith talent. Then my eyes locked onto one scrawny dwarf. Biglin, martial, 30, strategy, 50, rating, A. Talents, heir of the courage forge, craftsman's heart, blacksmith. His raw numbers weren't amazing, but the system rated him A. Clearly talent weighs heavily in the evaluation, not just stats. That one, I said. I was so excited I forgot to ask the price. The merchant offered him for 10 gold coins. Dwarves are more popular than cat girls because of their smithing skills, though most slave owners can't actually make them cooperate, even with the collars. 10 gold was already double what the merchant paid, but it was a steal for me. Deal. I counted out 10 shiny coins. The merchant then asked for my name, saying he'd keep an eye out for anything special I might want. I introduced myself and dropped an extra gold coin into his hand. If you come across any unusual news or rare races, let me know. His face lit up. Of course, esteemed Baron Linway. Alone is always at your service. I could tell he'd upgraded his opinion of me. A generous noble who pays well and doesn't put on airs. That kind of connection is worth cultivating. I had Oxy the driver take the slaves back by carriage. As a noble, I couldn't ride in the same cart as slaves. Reputation matters. But I didn't make them walk either. Call it a small mercy from my earth sensibilities. Walking back with Yahello, I stared at the barren land and tried to think of some clever way to develop it. I quickly arrived at the perfect answer. There was no way. I'm just an ordinary person from Earth. I'm not an engineer or a science genius. The only special thing about me is being able to see people's talents. I can't even fight. Young master, you're becoming more mature, Yahello said suddenly. I looked at her, confused. I mean, you're becoming a proper baron. You just bought a few unimportant slaves, but you also gained the friendship of a well-connected merchant. Your father never bothered with traders. Right? I mumbled. I didn't know how to explain to her that I wasn't being strategic. I was just being myself. Then a thought crossed my mind. With her strategy of 73, Yahello would make a great administrator. She'd take a huge load off my shoulders. Yahello, would you like to become my administrator? Her eyes went wide. Then they started turning red. Young master, is Yahello not doing a good job as your maid? I blinked. That was not the reaction I expected. No, of course not. I just think you might have talent for it. I wanted you to give it a try. She lowered her head. Yahello doesn't want to be an administrator. I just want to stay by your side. I didn't push it. If she didn't want to, I wouldn't force her. Though I did feel a little disappointed. It's been a few days since I bought the slaves. Today I set up a lunch for everyone. My own large table, a separate one for Norrell, and a smaller one for the slaves, Aquina, Biglin, and Saruka. The meal was stir-fried rapeseed flowers with white bread and a big bowl of potato soup. I took a bite. a bit bland, but salt and pepper are luxury items here, so the cook had to go easy on them. Back on Earth, this would be the most basic meal imaginable. Here, for a baron, this counts as fancy. Knights only get wheat cakes or bran bread. Commoners and slaves eat even worse, cold, rock-hard black bread that you literally need a knife and water to choke down. You could use it as a weapon in summer. Go ahead, eat, I said, looking at the others. Nobody was touching their food. Norrell and Yahello were fine, but the slaves looked terrified. They were probably thinking this was their last meal before I did something terrible to them. Why would a noble feed them the same food he eats? It didn't make sense to them. Norrell clearly thought it was strange too. A noble eating in the same room as slaves is pretty improper, though at least we weren't at the same table. Yahello didn't mind. She's been eating with me for years. Biglin the dwarf figured it out first. If this was his last meal, he was going to enjoy it. He wolfed down everything in seconds, drained his potato soup in one gulp, then stared at Saruka and Aquina's untouched plates like he was ready to eat theirs too. Aquina started eating next. Saruka was the last. Shy and cautious, she only picked up her fork when she saw everyone else eating. I nodded, satisfied, and waved for the cook to bring Biglin a second helping. Saruka was looking much better now. When I first brought her home, the poor cat girl was unconscious for days. I had to call in a priest to heal her, which cost me 7 or 8 gold coins. That stung, but she's going to be important to my future. I won't be cheap about that. After lunch, I went back to work. There's always a mountain of tasks waiting. I sent the butler to find merchants selling iron ore, but instead we discovered that the locals in Luika territory had been sitting on plenty of iron ore all along. The mines had been leased out because my family couldn't afford to develop them. I spent 600 gold coins buying back iron ore supplies, then another 100 on smithing tools and equipment for the forge. Whatever was left went to daily upkeep and repairs around the territory. I slumped back in my chair and sighed. You never know how expensive everything is until you're the one paying for it. I need to find a way to make money, and fast. Later, I learned a bit about what was going on with the slaves behind the scenes, though I didn't hear it directly at the time. Saruka and Aquina were lying in the comfortable room I'd given them. Warm beds, clean sheets, no more begging for scraps of black bread. A few days ago, this kind of life would have been unthinkable for them. They were from the same cat tribe village. They should have lived simple lives, married, had children, grown old peacefully. Instead, Rima's army destroyed their village. The resistors were killed. The soldiers did unspeakable things to the adult women. The only reason these two were spared was because a centurion decided they were too young and skinny to survive rough treatment, so they were sold to slavers instead. Aquina spoke up quietly. She admitted she'd always been jealous of Saruka back in the village. Quiet, pretty Saruka who all the boys liked, while Aquina was just a wild tomboy who hunted and played rough. When they were both captured, part of her felt a twisted sense of equality. She hated all humans for what those soldiers did to her parents. Yet here was a human boy giving them warm beds and real food. She didn't understand my motives. Maybe I was fattening them up just to tear everything away later. But they'd already been through hell. What more could I do to them? With the slave collars on their necks, they couldn't fight back or even kill themselves. What Aquina didn't tell Saruka was that she'd watch me pay a priest 7 or 8 gold coins to save Saruka's life, more than what I'd paid for both of them combined. Only Saruka got that treatment. Aquina just got the same food as everyone else. She kept that detail to herself, wanting Saruka to feel the same anxiety she felt, instead of feeling special. Even here, even after everything, Saruka always seemed to get more, and Aquina was tired of it. Biglin, I called out in the spacious smithy. After a week of good food and drink, the stocky dwarf had warmed up to me. He could tell I wasn't like the other nobles he'd known. Esteemed master, Biglin is here, he said, and I could tell he meant it. The food, the fruit wine, the freedom to move around. He was living better here than he ever did back in his dwarf village. Working for me didn't bother him at all. He already knew why I'd brought him to the forge. What do you think of this smithy? I asked. It's nice. I sighed and put on a sad face. You know, Luika territory isn't exactly rich. You wouldn't want the territory to go bankrupt and lose those white bread and fruit wine meals, would you? That hit him where it hurt. He'd gotten used to the good life. Master, I want to help, but the weapons I forge might have some flaws. Regular people might not be able to use them. I didn't understand what he meant, so he offered to demonstrate. While he worked, I pulled up his stats again. His loyalty had climbed to 70, enough to start trusting him. I was still curious about that. Heir of the Courage Forge, talent. It took a while. He heated, hammered, and purified the iron over and over, shaping it slowly into a sword. After the final quenching, a thick, heavy iron sword sat on the table. It's done, master. Now I understood his flaw. I tried to pick up the sword and couldn't even lift it. Embarrassing, but it was just too heavy. You'd probably need a certain level of martial strength to even swing this thing. I called Norrell over. He picked it up easily, and his eyes lit up. He turned it over in his hands, clearly in love with it. This is a great sword, he said. Much better than anything on the market. But weaker soldiers won't be able to lift it, so that was the flaw. In Bigland's mind, fragile humans couldn't handle his dwarf-style weapons. My lord, could I use this one? Norrell asked after a moment's hesitation. He'd been fighting with a cheap, easily breakable blade until now. Of course, he thanked me several times over, and I watched his loyalty jump from 70 to 80. It had been stuck at 70 ever since he started serving me. One good sword finally moved the needle. Bigland, keep making them just like this, I said. He sighed. All right, but master, your knight is unusually strong. Not all soldiers can swing my sword so easily. I smiled. I know. You just keep forging. I'll pay you for it. 1 silver coin per sword of this quality. Bigland stared at me like he was dreaming. 1 silver per sword. 10 swords make a gold coin. He could forge 20 a day. That's 2 gold coins daily. And I was providing all the materials. And he was a slave with no status. Praise you, great master. He bowed deeply, genuinely grateful. His loyalty climbed another 10 points. At this rate, I could probably take the slave collar off, and he still wouldn't leave. On the walk back to the manor, Norrell was practically buzzing. My lord, that dwarf blacksmith's weapons are really something. Think your soldiers could handle swords like that? I asked. His eyes gleamed. Not yet, but after I'm done training them, definitely. If we could equip the whole 100-man guard with weapons like those, bandits would think twice. Armor could wait. I patted his shoulder. I'm counting on you. I won't let you down, my lord. I could tell Norrell was rethinking his opinion of me. When he first heard I'd traded my grandfather's gladiator's crest for him and 1,000 gold coins, he'd been disappointed. I'd thrown away family honor. And when he saw the sorry state of my guard unit and their broken equipment, he'd felt even worse about his prospects. But today changed something. I'd found a talented dwarf smith and put him to work. Maybe this young baron from the edge of the kingdom wasn't as hopeless as he'd thought. If I kept making smart moves like this, maybe Norrell wouldn't even need to become a commoner noble on his own. Maybe he could just ask me for what he wanted, once I'd grown powerful enough to grant it. Bigland turned 600 gold coins worth of iron ore into 200 heavy longswords in just 1 week. Watching rows and rows of swords wrapped in leather being carried away felt almost unreal. I promised him his payment and I'd keep my word, but it would have to wait until I sold the extras. My guard only had about 100 men, so 100 swords would be enough. Actually, maybe fewer. Not everyone could wield these things. From my observations, you needed at least 30 in martial strength to barely use one, and 40 or above to handle it properly. When I went to see the soldiers again, I thought I was seeing things. Their stats had jumped. Men who used to have martial scores in the low 20s were now hitting 35, 38, even higher. Ratings went from E to E. Loyalty climbed too, from the 40s into the 50s. The lazy, unfocused look in their eyes had been replaced by something harder. Every single one of the 100 guards now had martial strength above 30. Norrell really knew how to train soldiers. With real weapons in hand, they could handle ordinary bandits now. Armor was still lacking, but one problem at a time. After the swords were distributed, Norrell gave them a short speech. He'd promised them the Baron would provide weapons, and now he had delivered. He asked me to say a few words too, but I turned him down. Next came selling the extra 100 swords. A regular sword goes for under 5 gold coins. These weren't ordinary though. My target was at least 30 gold per sword. If I could sell all 100, that would be 3,000 gold coins. I wasn't going anywhere near Fedra territory. If that old Baron found out I had high-quality weapons, he'd try to worm his way in. I'd go straight to the capital. Bigland couldn't make armor yet, so I'd need to buy some in the capital too. This trip was necessary, even though I'd just come back from there not long ago. This time Yahello didn't come along. The poor girl caught a cold from the big temperature swings between day and night, and couldn't even get out of bed to see me off. Norrell offered to escort me, but I told him to stay. The road to the capital was safe enough. I only needed 2 soldiers. The real danger was at Luika territory itself. If bandits showed up while I was gone, someone needed to be there to command the guards. The trip went smoothly. Without Yahello, though, I felt oddly lost. It took me forever to get my clothes straight, and at one point I reached out for the cup of tea she always had ready, then remembered she was back home. I laughed at myself and shook my head. Funny how fast you get used to someone. As the roads widened, we reached the capital. My mindset was completely different from last time. I headed for the Far East Trading Company, one of the biggest in the capital. They do business not just in Norrance, but in the kingdoms of Yade and Rima too. It was founded by the famous Duke Simon, one of Norrance's hawkish political leaders who believes in conquest and expansion. You'd think a warlord type wouldn't run a merchant guild, but apparently selling things and conquering people aren't mutually exclusive. The company had a solid reputation, so this was where I'd sell my swords. In a world where war could break out at any time, weapons are always in demand. My Baron's banner got me a parking spot easily enough. I placed one sword on the guildmaster's desk. "Is this what you'd like to sell, esteemed Baron Luika?" I nodded and sipped the tea he'd offered. "If the price is right, we could have a long-term arrangement." He drew the sword from its leather wrapping with one hand. I hadn't checked his stats, but just from that move I knew his martial strength was at least 40. He examined it in the sunlight. "A nice piece," he said, "but it's not a magic weapon. You understand what I mean?" I knew what he was getting at. Plenty of nobles roll in with some old family sword, claiming it's enchanted just to squeeze out extra gold. Barons, counts, he'd seen them all. I smiled. "As you can see, it's simply a well-made, ordinary weapon." He appreciated the honesty. "I can offer 30 Norrance gold coins for this one." That matched my expectation exactly. "Could you go higher?" "I have a lot more of these." He thought for a moment. "If you can supply 100, I'll pay 40 gold each. 40 times 100, 4,000 gold coins. After equipping my own men with the first 100 swords, I was walking away with over 3,000 gold coins in pure profit. Deal. A pleasure doing business, esteemed Baron. I gave 3 silver coins to Oxiu and the 2 soldiers who came with me, told them to go enjoy themselves in the capital. They ran off to taverns and gambling halls. Oxiu stayed behind to help. 4,000 gold coins filled 4 whole crates, and they needed to be stored at the Far East Trading Company until I was ready to leave. I went shopping for armor. 100 iron chainmail sets and a few dozen shields cost me about 1,000 gold coins. For a moment, I thought about building a cavalry unit, but a single good horse costs 300 gold. I could only afford 10. I dropped that idea fast. Before heading home, I bought gifts. A pink bow for Yahello and different colored ones for Aquina and Saruka. They'd only been with me a short while, spending most of their time learning basic maid duties, but if I was going to win their loyalty, I couldn't play favorites. Then I stopped at a magic bookshop. Magic was still a strange, distant concept to me. I'd never actually seen a mage in all my time on this continent. Apparently, only viscounts and above could afford to keep them. But Saruka had magic affinity as a talent, which meant she was a natural-born mage. I just needed to get her loyalty high enough, then invest in her training. I bought 3 books. Introduction to Magic for 130 gold, Applications of Magical Properties for 300 gold, and Romantic Tales of Mages for 100 gold. The first 2 were for Saruka's education. The last one, well, everyone needs some light reading. The bookshop even threw in 2 practice wands since I was such a big spender. By the time I left, the sky had 2 red moons hanging overhead. I was ready to go home. I missed Yahello's tea. When I arrived, Yahello was already waiting. She threw herself at me the moment I stepped off the carriage, hugging me tight. She only let go when she noticed the odd looks from people around us. She'd been miserable the whole week I was gone. I flicked her nose gently and pulled out the pink bow. She held it like it was the most precious treasure in the world, her eyes soft and warm. Aquina and Saruka stood nearby in their maid outfits, looking shy and uncertain. When I handed them their bows too, they were genuinely stunned. They hadn't expected anything. I glanced at their stats while they were happy. Loyalty had gone up nicely. Aquina was at 60, Saruka at 80. Good enough. It was time to remove their slave collars. After dinner, I wiped my mouth and spoke up. Everyone, the maids, Norrell, went quiet. Starting tomorrow, no more slave collars. Those things are heavy, right? And if any of you want to leave, just tell me. I'll give you money for the road. Yahello looked like she wanted to protest, but she held her tongue when she saw I was serious. I placed the slave contracts in front of Saruka and Aquina. Tearing these up would deactivate their collars. They'd be free. Both of them stared, wide-eyed. Saruka spoke first, quietly but firmly. Master, Saruka doesn't want to leave. She pushed the contract back toward me. Aquina's eyes flickered. Whatever doubts she had, she did the same. I smiled, grabbed both contracts, and tore them to pieces. Paper scraps drifted to the floor. I'm not joking. You can leave whenever you want. The reason doesn't matter. You just need to know you're free now. That's enough. No conditions, no logic behind it. I bought them, and now I set them free. Once the chain mail was distributed and my guards suited up, they finally looked like real soldiers. Before this, you could have told me they were a village militia and I'd have believed it. The equipment I gave them was something most barons couldn't dream of affording. Even Fedra's hundreds of light cavalry only wore leather armor and carried inferior weapons. Iron armor is normally reserved for Viscount-level forces at minimum. My 100 men could handle almost anything short of mages, heavy cavalry, or griffin riders. Norrell, take the soldiers and clear out the bandits nearby. He placed his fist on his chest. I won't let you down, my lord. The bandits operating around Luika territory called themselves the Blood Pigs, about 200 of them. Their leader had terrorized my guards for years. Even my father couldn't wipe them out. They knew the terrain and hid in the mountains. It didn't matter anymore. They outnumbered us 2-1, but their weapons were garbage compared to ours. Their arrows bounced off our shields and armor. Norrell's training had pushed the soldiers hard, and now it paid off. Our heavy swords cut through the bandits' weapons like they were made of wood. The result, 0 deaths on our side, 3 wounded. Total annihilation of the Blood Pigs. We captured a pile of weapons and, to my delight, over a dozen decent horses. The bandits had been robbing merchant caravans and stockpiling. Some of them died screaming that the Royal Night Order had come. With the way my guards fought, I couldn't blame them for thinking that. I tossed the captured junk weapons to Bigland for recycling. The horses were the real prize. I could finally start building a cavalry unit. The problem was, nobody on my staff knew how to handle these wild northern horses except my old driver, and he was too elderly and lame to manage them. He'd been working for the Luika family since my grandfather's days. I'd have to find a proper horse handler later. Then Aquina stepped forward and volunteered. She had the beast-taming talent, and animals naturally took to her. Taming these horses would be easy for her. It turned out that after I removed her collar, Aquina had spent days testing whether she was truly free. One morning she walked all the way to the edge of Luika territory and stayed there until evening. When she came back, the only question anyone asked was where she'd been. Nobody chased her. Nobody watched her. She was free, and that left her lost. She had no home to return to. Even if she crossed back through Rima to reach her tribe's land, her parents were dead. Everything was gone. I had given her warmth, food, and peace. The fire of revenge in her eyes was slowly dying out. Staying here wasn't so bad after all. As for Saruka, I called her to my study one afternoon. The last bit of sunlight was coming through the window when she quietly pushed open the door. Master, you wanted to see me? I'd been reading. Well, I'd been a little too absorbed in romantic tales of mages and had to snap out of it. I casually set it aside. Saruka, have a seat. Are you interested in magic? Her loyalty had climbed to 85. I reached for a book on the shelf to give her. I accidentally grabbed Romantic Tales of Mages. Her face turned bright red. She clearly misunderstood what I was suggesting. I realized my mistake, felt my own face heat up, and quickly swapped it for Introduction to Magic. Wrong book. This one. I swear I wasn't trying anything funny. Once she calmed down, I explained. I think you might have a talent for magic. If you could become a powerful mage, it would be a huge help to Luika territory. Since you've chosen to stay, I hope you'll contribute what you can. She nodded and took the book, though she looked uncertain. But master, I don't even know if I have any magical talent. I believe in you, I told her. Give it your best. And even if it doesn't work out, that's fine too. Luika territory will always be your home. With my encouragement, Saruka threw herself into studying magic full-time. I excused her from maid duties so she could focus. Meanwhile, I bought another 2,000 gold coins worth of iron ore to keep Biglin busy. I even hired 2 locals to help him at the forge. A month later, Biglin had produced 500 swords. At the previous price, that was 25,000 gold coins waiting to happen. To put that in perspective, Luika territory's monthly tax income was barely 10 gold coins. 25,000 would take lifetimes to collect through taxes. Even Fedra would be jealous of that kind of money. Looking at those shiny new swords lined up, I wasn't seeing weapons. I was seeing mountains of gold. I paid Biglin his share, and he went straight to the tavern to celebrate, buying drinks for his 2 helpers. Honestly, as long as that dwarf has meat and ale, he's happy. Things were looking up on the security front too. After Norrell wiped out the blood pigs, the area had been peaceful. Miners and hunters who'd fled from bandit raids started returning to Luika territory. Back at the Far East Trading Company, Guildmaster Weiss greeted me with a big smile. He told me the swords from my last batch had been a huge hit. Nobles who bought them couldn't stop praising the quality. He'd bought them at 50 gold and flipped them for 70, and demand still outstripped supply. If I had another batch to sell, could you handle it? I asked. His eyes lit up. However many you have, Baron, the Far East Trading Company can take them all. After another smooth transaction, Weiss threw in some generous extras, a purebred northern horse worth at least 1,000 gold, a full set of ornate armor, and a fine noble's sword. Around 5,000 gold in gifts total. I accepted graciously and told him I'd keep our partnership going. Then, over drinks, Weiss leaned in close. Since we're getting along so well, I have some insider information for you. He'd switched from calling me Baron Luika to just Lin Wei, a sign of closeness. In about 2 months, the 3rd autumn campaign starts. If you're joining, why not fight under Count Aichin's banner? With our friendship, I could get you at least a centurion position. The autumn campaign is an old Norrens tradition, basically raiding the richer border territories of Rima and Yade. I'd never been strong enough to participate before. I could barely handle bandits. But now my guards were well-equipped and battle-tested. I was tempted. Count Aichin was Duke Simon's son-in-law, a powerful figure in the left-wing faction. The kingdom's politics were split between hawks and doves, and most nobles had picked a side. I was one of the rare neutrals, mostly because I'd been too weak and poor for anyone to care about recruiting. A centurion position sounded mediocre, and it was. Every baron who joins a count's army gets that much. If they'd offered me a commander of 1,000, I might actually consider it. I'd accepted Weiss's gifts today, but that didn't mean I was ready to tie myself to Duke Simon's faction. At the same time, refusing Weiss openly would burn a valuable business relationship. So I played drunk. Did you say there are elf girls nearby? I slurred, looking around stupidly. Where? I don't see any. Weiss had been whispering, and we'd both had plenty of beer. Pretending I hadn't heard him was easy enough. He slapped his thigh and laughed. You're drunk, Baron Luika? We don't offer that kind of service here. But if you're interested, I'll keep an eye out for elf slaves. Smart man. He didn't push the political question. As long as I wasn't in the opposing faction, doing business with a neutral was fine by him. He was a bit disappointed, sure, but I was just a small baron. He himself was only an untitled baron working for Count Aichin, who worked for Duke Simon. The hierarchy went on above him. Then it's a deal, I said about the elf thing, and stood up to leave. Weiss pretended to get up to see me off, then wobbled back onto his stool. No need to see me out, Guildmaster Weiss. Very well then, Baron Luika. Looking forward to our next deal, he'd switched back to the formal, Baron Luika. We both silently understood that the political conversation was over. After I left, I'm sure Weiss dropped the drunk act completely. His eyes were probably sharp and clear the moment I walked out the door. Back in the carriage, the alcohol hit me hard. The swaying ride made my stomach churn, and I ended up throwing up. The maids had quite a job cleaning the carriage afterward. I was glad Yahello didn't see. Her mix of worry and scolding would have been too much. I've been in this world for many years now. All my blood relatives are gone. Father had a few brothers, but they left to become knights somewhere after losing inheritance rights. Maybe they died in battle. I never heard of any other Luika making a name for themselves. Yahello is the closest thing to family I have left. Aquina had been doing well taming the horses. The desire to run away had faded from her eyes. Saruka was the obedient type, pouring everything into her magic studies. I had confidence in her because of her stats, but she didn't know that. She was terrified of disappointing me, so she practiced day and night without rest. Then one day she came to my study. "Master, I've finished both books." She placed them on my desk, 400 gold coins worth of textbooks, completed in less than a week. I knew she was talented, but this was beyond even my expectations. I checked her panel. Saruka, Martial, 5, Strategy, 108, Rating, A, Loyalty, 87. Talents, Magic Affinity, Wisdom Blessing, Well-Traveled, Novice Mage. Her strategy had jumped 9 points, and she'd gained a new talent, Novice Mage. Real progress. But progress also meant real expenses ahead. The bookshop in the capital only sells beginner-level material. Anything beyond that requires enrollment at the Royal Magic Academy. Intermediate training costs at least 5,000 gold. Advanced level, 20,000 minimum. Most talented commoners teach themselves the basics, then earn money through adventurer guilds or become court mages to fund further study. I just made good money, but thinking about these future costs still made my chest tight. But I couldn't shortchange my own catgirl mage. "In a few days, go to the Magic Academy in the capital," I told her. "I'll give you the title of appointed knight under Luika territory. All your expenses at the academy will be covered by me." The knight title was important. The academy is full of noble children who'd bully a catgirl commoner without protection, at least with my family name behind her. And the academy's policy of treating all races equally as long as tuition is paid, she'd have some basic safety. Saruka froze. Her gray tail swayed nervously and her little ears twitched. I'd just told her she was no longer a slave, that she was now a knight, and that I'd pay for her entire education. It was a lot to take in. And Master, her eyes turned red. She'd been an orphan raised by her village elder. After the elder died, she survived alone picking wild vegetables. Then Rima's soldiers captured her, and she became a slave. She'd thought her life was over. I gave her everything: dignity, safety, a future. Nobody had treated her this well since the old village chief. "What's wrong?" I asked, confused. Was she homesick? I glanced at her loyalty. It had been 87. Now it was 100. Maxed out just like that. With loyalty like that, every coin I invested in her was worth it. She threw herself into my arms. Her small body trembled against mine. For someone so thin, her grip was surprisingly tight. I actually felt short of breath for a second. "Master, Saruka will never let you down." Her pale blue eyes looked up at me, and I could see my reflection in them. She was memorizing my face, burning it into her heart. I'd given her a new life, and she'd decided to dedicate the rest of it to me. That night, moonlight poured through my window. I was studying when I heard soft footsteps in the hallway, then a gentle knock. "Master, are you asleep?" It was Saruka, standing in the doorway hugging a white pillow, looking at me with hopeful eyes. For a moment my mind went somewhere it shouldn't have, but I pulled myself together. "I can't sleep," she said quietly. "Can I sleep with you?" My bed was enormous. You could fit 5 Sarukas on it. She was just nervous about leaving for the academy. That's all it was. I let her in. We lay on the same bed, and eventually my breathing steadied as I drifted off. I didn't know it then, but Saruka stayed awake a while longer, watching my face in the moonlight. She thought about everything she'd been through, the hardship, the slavery, the hunger, and she decided it had all been a test from the gods. Because at the end of it, she found me. If there really are gods, she whispered to herself, please keep my master safe forever. Aquina didn't like Saruka much, or so she kept telling herself. But when the day came for Saruka to leave for the Magic Academy in the capital, the first thing Aquina felt wasn't jealousy. It was sadness. Aquina knew she had no talent for magic. Saruka had let her look at the books, and she'd nearly fallen asleep after a few pages. That settled it. Aquina, I'm leaving now, Saruka said softly. She'd always known Aquina didn't like her, but she also remembered the truth. Back in the village, when the other kids tried to bully the quiet new girl, it was Aquina who stood up for her. And when the old village chief died and Saruka cried alone, Aquina had been hiding behind a tree, watching over her. Saruka never forgot any of it. Aquina said nothing. Saruka just smiled and waved, then walked toward me. Since Yahello was there, Saruka kept her distance, She still felt guilty about sneaking into my bed the night before. Looking back on it, all she felt was embarrassment and a grudging admiration for her own courage. Poor Yahello had no idea she'd already been outmaneuvered. She just held Saruka's hand gently and said, "Take care of yourself in the capital." Saruka's heart was pounding. She really did feel like a sneaky little cat. I just gave Saruka a nod of encouragement. With her loyalty at 100, she was absolutely worth the investment. After the carriage disappeared down the road, Aquina finally snapped out of it and shouted after her, "Safe travels. I'll be waiting for you to come back." The last heat of summer faded with the first autumn breeze, and the autumn campaign was getting close. I received an official invitation from the Kingdom of Norrance. That surprised me. I figured they only remembered I existed because I'd sold that gladiator's crest to the royal family. Otherwise, I doubt King Zaluk XIII would have thought twice about a nobody baron on the border. I was definitely going. The campaign was the best way to earn military merit, and merit was the only path to a higher title. The higher my rank, the more voice I'd have in the kingdom, and the better I could protect what mattered to me. As for getting new territory from a promotion, that wasn't realistic. Every piece of land in Norrance was already claimed. New territory would only come from a massive war that forced Rima or Yade to surrender land. That wasn't happening anytime soon. I divided my remaining funds. 5,000 gold went to Saruka's tuition. Of the remaining 20,000, I spent 10,000 on iron ore. Luika territory had plenty of mines, enough to last a century. The gold I poured into the local economy got the residents excited about mining. Even hunters were switching careers to become miners. More workers meant more merchants, and more merchants meant more tax revenue. It was a good cycle. The territory had always been poor because there was no way to use all the ore we could dig up, and the land was too barren to farm. Now Bigland's forge gave the ore purpose. I spent 5,000 on repairing the crumbling walls, digging wells, and building proper roads. The last 5,000 went toward recruiting 200 strong locals for Norrell to train alongside the existing guards. Bigland would handle their weapons. For a big operation like the Autumn Campaign, you don't usually see heavy cavalry charges or mage duels. Those trump cards only come out in full-scale wars. My infantry would be more than enough. One morning I looked at myself in the mirror, golden hair, brown eyes, long lashes. Decent looking, honestly. Slim build with some lean muscle. But my combat ability was basically zero. I really was just a pretty noble with no fighting power. Yahello was picking out clothes for me because I was heading to the training grounds to check on the soldiers' progress. Then came a knock at the door. The old butler's voice. "My lord, you have a visitor." "Who?" "The butler from Fedra territory. Baron Fedra invites you to dinner tonight." Fedra. That smiling face floated up in my memory. So the old merchant had heard about Luika territory's rapid growth. In just a few months, we'd nearly surpassed his territory. Some traveling merchant must have carried the news to him. And now the man who'd slammed his door in my face was crawling back. No, my voice was cold and flat. "Yes, my lord," the butler replied and left. Yahello finished adjusting my white shirt. I looked sharp. There was a natural air of nobility about me that I hadn't felt before. "Let's go, Yahello. We're heading to the training grounds." The training field was wide. Norrell had expanded it to fit the growing number of soldiers. I watched them drilling with their swords and nodded with satisfaction. What a difference from those pathetic weaklings I first inherited. Two groups were clearly visible. The first batch, the original 100, had martial values around 40 now, true veterans. They were sparring with real blades, full contact. Injuries happened, but better to bleed here than die on a real battlefield. The second group was the 200 new recruits, still in the 20s and 30s, learning basic sword forms under Norrell's watchful eye. With less than 2 months until the Autumn Campaign, I was planning to field 50 heavy cavalry. The horses were mostly captured from the Blood Pig bandits. Under Aquina's care, those already impressive northern warhorses had become muscular and spirited. Bigland forged full sets of horse armor from blueprints I'd bought at market. The armor gleamed silver and was so heavy that a strong soldier could barely drag one set. Once fitted onto those massive horses, they'd become killing machines. But I wasn't going to show the horse armor right away during the campaign. I'd have the camp followers haul the crates along with pack mules. Heavy cavalry is powerful but slow. This wasn't a siege, so the armor was just insurance. More importantly, I didn't want to draw attention. A baron who can afford heavy cavalry would make a lot of nobles very curious. Until I was strong enough, I needed to stay under the radar. Meanwhile, at the Magic Academy in the capital, things were going well for Saruka, though I only heard the details later. Her instructor called her up to demonstrate a fireball spell. She raised her practice wand, chanted the incantation, and a blast of flame punched straight through a massive boulder. The class erupted in applause. Her teacher was impressed. In just over a month, Saruka had mastered every intermediate spell, and her power was remarkable. In 2 months, she'd earn her intermediate mage certification. She might even attempt the youngest ever advanced mage qualification. The instructor knew that if Saruka reached advanced rank, every noble house would try to recruit her. A tiny baron's territory surely couldn't afford the tuition. Powerful families would approach Saruka behind the scenes. It would be the ultimate test of her loyalty. What the instructor didn't know was that Saruka was counting the days until she could go home. She remembered every coin I'd spent on her. Even if I couldn't pay for advanced training, she'd earn the money herself before she'd ever consider betraying me. Between classes, Saruka had picked up a tutoring job. A countess had hired her to teach magic to her young daughter, 100 gold coins per lesson. Saruka was grateful for the work. One evening, as Saruka arrived at the count's mansion for her lesson, Countess Pharaohs stopped her in the hallway. Standing beside her was a heavy-set, middle-aged man, Count Pharaohs himself. After introductions, the count got straight to the point. Saruka, I'd like you to join the Pharaohs family. Whatever your current arrangement offers, I'll double it. Your advanced mage tuition, a proper magic staff after graduation, rare spellbooks. The Pharaohs family will provide everything. Saruka paused for just a moment, then bowed politely. Thank you for your kindness, Count Pharaohs. But I'm already an appointed knight of Luika territory. I have no plans to join another house. The count was surprised but not offended. In fact, her refusal impressed him. Someone who'd jumped ship at the first offer wasn't worth recruiting. The fact that she turned him down proved she was exactly the kind of talent worth pursuing. He smiled. Well, if you ever change your mind, my door is open, he was confident. He was one of Duke Simon's powerful vassals, a real player in the kingdom. Compared to some unknown, impoverished baron on the border, he figured the little cat girl would eventually see which way the wind was blowing. With 1 month left before the autumn campaign, Norrell's relentless training had finally shaped all 300 guards into real soldiers. Their martial values were all above 40, with some reaching 50. Ratings jumped from E straight to C, skipping D entirely. I picked the top 50, the strongest, and told them they'd be getting warhorses. Their faces were priceless. Having iron armor and good swords was already more than they'd ever dreamed of, and now actual horses? They were pulled aside for cavalry training. They needed to ride competently before the campaign, or my dream of a heavy cavalry charge would stay on paper. Norrell was the most excited. He'd known about the horses, but hadn't expected me to deploy them so soon. He picked the strongest stallion and threw himself into training alongside the men. Aquina watched the horses being led away one by one, looking a bit sad. She'd bonded with them during all those weeks of taming. Only the purebred that Guildmaster Weiss gave me was left in the stable. Master, tell them to be careful during training, she said quietly. Her tail was swaying, and honestly I wanted to reach out and pet her ears. But Aquina wasn't the soft, cuddly type like Saruka. I'd probably get bitten, so I held back. As I turned to leave, she suddenly spoke up. Master, is there any news from Saruka? I shook my head. No letters from Saruka herself, just billing notices from the academy and a note praising her for earning her intermediate mage certification. I didn't have a great sense of what that meant, but it sounded impressive. Aquina's face fell for a moment. Then she gathered her courage, face turning bright red. Could I write a letter to Saruka? I smiled. Of course. Give it to the old butler and he'll send it for you. Thank you, Master. She bolted away, embarrassed. That was a first. I'd never seen Aquina act shy like that before. Meanwhile, things at the Magic Academy had taken a turn I hadn't anticipated. Saruka's instructor decided on a whim to teach her an advanced level spell. Saruka mastered it in a single afternoon. 3 months into her enrollment, and she could already cast advanced magic. Her teacher had been at the academy for over 30 years and had never seen anything like it. Saruka's theoretical knowledge was already beyond the advanced level, and now her practical skills had caught up. Throughout her time at the academy, viscounts and counts kept approaching her with offers: better pay, tuition coverage, rare spellbooks. She turned them all down. She was loyal to me, her unknown little baron, and nobody could understand why. Her instructor went to the dean to request reduced fees for her star student. She came back almost immediately. "Saruka, the dean wants to see you." On the way there, the instructor briefed her. The current dean was Aaliyah, the 13th-ranked Grand Magus on the entire continent, an honorary Duchess of Norrance, and an elf with an incredibly long lifespan. She'd been dean since the Academy's founding. Countless powerful mages had graduated under her watch, serving not just Norrance, but holding high positions in Rima and Yade as well. Saruka pushed open the heavy ancient door and came face to face with a breathtakingly beautiful white-haired elf. Pale red eyes studied her with cool interest. Despite the elegant gray mage robes, her striking figure was impossible to hide. "Come here," Aaliyah said. Saruka obeyed. The dean examined her closely for a long time. "Very talented," she finally said. Then, out of nowhere, "Do you know who I am?" "You're the dean." Aaliyah smiled. A faint, cold smile that somehow made the flowers outside the window look dull by comparison. "Saruka, I want to take you as my personal student. Will you accept?" The words hit Saruka like a thunderbolt. She stood there stunned for several seconds before slowly nodding. "Teacher Aaliyah," she bowed deeply. Even someone as innocent as Saruka understood what this meant. Becoming the personal disciple of a legendary Grand Magus changed everything. No one could bully her or pressure her with shady tactics anymore. She could develop her talents freely, with the most powerful protection imaginable. The news that Saruka became Dean Aaliyah's personal disciple spread across the entire capital like wildfire. Even the king heard about it. I only learned the full story later, but it was bigger than I'd imagined. Aaliyah wasn't just some academy dean. She was a true pillar of the empire, an honorary duchess personally appointed by Norrance's founding emperor. She didn't even have to bow to King Zeluk the 13th. She'd been running the academy for hundreds of years, being an elf with an extraordinarily long life. And in all that time, she'd only taken 2 personal disciples before Saruka. The first was a human who became a legendary Grand Magus, fought off 3 Grand Magi at once, and even slew a dragon single-handedly. Once considered the strongest mage on the continent. The second was an elf, now the empress of the White Elf clan in the southern continent, ranked 5th among all Grand Magi. Both were legends. Saruka was the third. Ever. Naturally, the whole kingdom went crazy. Invitations and recruitment offers flooded in from everywhere. But now Saruka had the confidence to dump every last letter in the trash. Before becoming Aaliyah's disciple, she'd never have dared. Now she had real backing. Aaliyah asked about Saruka's background, and when she learned my little mage was just a minor knight from an obscure baron's territory, she simply patted Saruka's head and told her to never reveal where she came from. Everyone who already knew would keep silent. Aaliyah understood. If people found out a nobody baron was behind this prodigy, it would put a target on Luika territory, not help it. Saruka needed to become powerful in her own right before that connection could be made public. Aaliyah herself was firmly neutral in the kingdom's politics. She wouldn't openly protect my territory, even for Saruka's sake. Doing so would shatter centuries of neutrality and make her a target for both factions. She simply didn't want the hassle. Count Pharaohs, the one who tried to recruit Saruka, received a letter stamped with Aaliyah's personal seal. From what I gathered, the poor man nearly had a heart attack. The letter was polite, but the message was clear. Keep your mouth shut about Saruka's origins. Pharaohs deeply regretted not securing Saruka when he'd had the chance, and he certainly wasn't going to cross a Grand Magus. But his merchant's mind started spinning. Why would Aaliyah take a personal interest in someone from Luika territory? Could the Baron secretly be connected to her? Maybe even her illegitimate son? He couldn't help but speculate. Either way, he decided to quietly investigate my territory and possibly build a friendly relationship. Just in case. Meanwhile, Saruka received Aquina's letter and was overjoyed. She'd been so absorbed in her studies that she'd forgotten she could write home. She was happily writing a reply when Aaliyah caught her. "Writing to your little baron?" Aaliyah teased. "No, teacher. It's my friend Aquina." Aaliyah's expression softened, but then she said something that made Saruka pause. Until you become a full magus, it's better if you don't write back. Saruka didn't understand. You need to be strong enough to stand openly at his side. An advanced mage isn't enough. You must become a magus. Only then will anyone thinking of threatening Luika territory have to think twice. But I miss them, Saruka whispered. Elias smiled gently. When you reach advanced mage rank, I'll give you a week off to visit home. Saruka's eyes lit up instantly. Go back to my side. That was all the motivation she needed to work even harder. Charge! My cavalry thundered across the training field, lances in hand, dust flying everywhere. They'd been drilling nonstop for a month with their new weapons, and I'd upgraded their meals from thin porridge to proper wheat cakes to keep their energy up. It worked. They trained like their lives depended on it. Looking at my 300 soldiers, I was satisfied. As long as we didn't run into special units or Rima's Royal Elite, we'd do well in the autumn campaign. Less than a week to go before we had to reach Furnace Bridge Fortress to register with the main army. I still hadn't gotten a reply from Saruka, but the Magic Academy had sent me updates. She was doing well, already the dean's personal student. Even out here in the middle of nowhere, I understood how incredible that was. I quickly figured out why she wasn't writing back. Luika territory was too weak, and she was getting too much attention. The dean was protecting me by keeping our connection hidden. I felt grateful, and also a bit amazed. Good thing I'd maxed out Saruka's loyalty before she left. Otherwise, all those tempting offers from powerful nobles might have actually stolen her away. Who would have guessed that quiet little cat girl would become such a prodigy? Well, me. But I'm cheating. I told Aquina about Saruka's situation. She was disappointed about not getting a reply, but after I explained things, she felt better. She was settling into life at Luika territory more and more. The desire for revenge seemed to be fading. Before departure, I gave the troops a speech. 300 fired-up guards stared at me with burning eyes. I drew on some knowledge from Earth to put together a decent motivational address. Even Norrell looked impressed. He hadn't expected me to be so well-spoken. Beyond my 300 elite, I'd recruited about 800 militia and farmhands to carry supplies. Before we left, Elula straightened my clothes with red-rimmed eyes, trying not to cry. Young master, you have to come back safe? I smiled and hugged her. I'll come back. Just don't jinx me. She looked confused at the strange expression, but I just patted her shoulder, climbed onto my horse, the purebred that guild Master Weiss had given me, and led the column forward with 2 light cavalry scouts riding ahead. Furnace Bridge Fortress was already packed with noble banners when we arrived. This was the last stronghold before Rima's border, normally garrisoned by 5,000 soldiers. Beyond the no-man's land ahead, you could already see Rima's fertile farmland in the distance. I walked up to the registration officer. 300 elite, 500 in the supply train. Elite? He looked skeptical. A baron with 300 elites? Then he looked past me at my soldiers, gleaming iron armor, quality weapons, disciplined formation. Even a few dozen cavalry on tall northern warhorses wearing full body armor. He nodded slowly. Indeed, elite. He admitted that even most viscounts couldn't field a force this strong. If I'd been a count, it would have made more sense. We entered the fortress. My troops were strong, but among the assembled nobility, we were just mid-tier in terms of numbers. Plenty of people glanced our way, then did a double take when they noticed my baron's badge. Viscounts and counts who'd been thinking about introducing themselves stopped in their tracks. A force this good belonging to a mere baron? That was jarring. And then there was Baron Fedra. I spotted him staring at my soldiers with the strangest expression on his face. He'd heard Luika territory was doing well. That's why he'd sent his butler to invite me to dinner. I'd refused, of course. Now, seeing my well-armed troops and powerful warhorses in person, he was probably kicking himself. He must have been thinking, if this kid had shown this kind of ability earlier, I never would have shut the door on him. He could have been my son-in-law. Then he looked back at his own light cavalry, thinner horses, leather armor, worse weapons, and the gap must have hit him like a punch. His thousands of guards couldn't match my 300 in quality. But regret was useless now. He'd made his choice when he refused to see me, and our relationship had soured beyond repair. The fact that I hadn't confronted him about it was already more courtesy than he deserved. After all, I'd shown up at his door in person, and he'd turned me away like a stranger. The night before we marched into Rima, plenty of barons came to chat me up. even a couple of low-ranking viscounts. They asked the usual things: was I married? Did I want a concubine? How did I build such a strong force? I brushed them all off politely. My father hadn't been dead long, so not ready for marriage was an easy excuse. As for my army secret, I just smiled and changed the subject. Even if I told them, they couldn't see stat panels anyway. We drew lots for marching order. I got lucky. First wave, right behind the king and the dukes. Riskier, but the rewards would be much better. The guys at the back would find nothing left to take. I won't pretend this was noble work. The autumn campaign was basically organized banditry. Norrance invades Rima's border every year, sometimes spring, sometimes autumn, sometimes winter. They grab livestock, loot villages, and drag people back as slaves. Rima and Yade hate us for it, but neither kingdom is strong enough to fight back alone. They'd need to team up, and that hasn't happened. Rima even built Furnace Bridge Fortress to defend against us, but Norrance captured it and turned it into our own staging base. After that, Rima just gave up and accepted the raids. Once we crossed into Rima's territory, it was honestly boring. A vast plain gave way to a huge forest dotted with villages and outposts. The king and dukes grabbed all the easy targets on the open plains: herds of cattle, clusters of shepherds. No point competing with them. I headed straight into the forest. Looking at how the nobles operated, pillaging, grabbing civilians, I couldn't help but think of one word: bandits. This was exactly what those blood pig raiders used to do to my territory. Norrell, tell the men, kill Rima soldiers only. No attacking civilians. Norrell looked confused. Capturing civilians was tradition. They could be used as laborers or sold to slavers for good money. But an order was an order, and he passed it down. The soldiers grumbled a bit, especially about missing out on Rima women, but I treated them well enough that nobody dared argue. We hit our first outpost quickly. 20 Rima soldiers in a watchtower, barely armed. My cavalry ran them down in minutes. Their equipment was terrible. My men didn't even bother looting the weapons. We took their valuables and cut off their heads as proof of kills. Rima people have blue eyes, so there's no faking who you killed. We cleared several more outposts as we pushed deeper. No villages yet. By noon, the men and horses were tired, so I ordered camp. Inside my tent, I peeled off my armor. My shoulders were already red and swollen from wearing it all morning. I laughed bitterly at myself. Whether I was mocking my own weak body or this whole bandit operation, I wasn't sure. While I rested, Norrell sent 2 scouts to survey the area. They came back with news. My lord, there's a small town nearby. Stone walls, but few guards and no heavy weapons. Towns in the forest weren't unusual. Rima is famous for its lush woodlands, and many settlements sit among the trees. Let's have a look. We followed the scouts along a thinning tree line until a road appeared, leading to a town. It looked even poorer than Luika territory used to be. The gates were wide open. Only a few soldiers patrolled the walls lazily. If not for those guards, I'd have thought it was abandoned. Something felt wrong. I checked the soldiers on the walls with my ability. Dewin, Martial, 60, Strategy, 40, Rating, C. Talents: Enhanced Perception, One-Handed Sword Mastery. Noah, Martial, 64, Strategy, 35, Rating, C. Talents: Spear Mastery. Every single guard had absurdly high stats, nearly on par with Norrance's Royal Knight Order. Way too strong for a rundown town with open gates and lazy discipline. This was a trap. Strong soldiers pretending to be weak, an inviting open gate, a town that looked easy to raid. If I'd charged in, my men would have become their war trophies instead. I wasn't falling for that. What I didn't know was that Fedra had been following me into the forest. As a merchant turned baron, he knew his troops couldn't compete with the big nobles out on the plains, so he figured he'd tail me and scavenge whatever I left behind. He lost track of me quickly in the dense woods. All he found along the way were 2 empty villages and a string of cleared outposts, headless Rima soldiers lying around with their leather armor still on. He couldn't believe I'd left the equipment behind. Was I really that rich now? Even the villagers had already fled into the forest because of my passing through. Fedra was furious at his luck. Then his scouts reported 2 things: my camp and the undefended town nearby. Fedra rode over and saw exactly what I'd seen. Wide open gates, a lower drawbridge, a handful of sleepy guards on the walls wearing leather armor. His knight was practically drooling, begging to charge in. The women, the loot, the easy war credits, it all looked too good. But Fedra was smarter than that. He noticed the same thing I had. Why wasn't I attacking? With my 300 elite, I could easily handle a few dozen guards in leather. The fact that I was just sitting there watching meant something was off. He made camp near mine, ordered no fires, and waited. I watched for 2 full days. The town stayed eerily quiet. No farmers working the surrounding fields. No hunters coming or going from the forest cabins nearby. No civilians moving in or out. Just those handful of lazy guards on the walls. When I checked their stats, every one of them had martial values in the 60s, nearly Royal Knight level. A town full of elite soldiers pretending to be a weak garrison with the gates wide open. I was completely certain now. This was a trap. My soldiers had been eating cold black bread for 2 days without any fires. The only thing keeping us going was plenty of water nearby. I decided to pull out. Going deeper would bring us close to Rima's George Fortress, supposedly the largest stronghold on the northern continent, with over 20,000 elite soldiers, heavy weapons, and mages. My 300 wouldn't even be a snack for them. I'd been hanging around partly to see if some fool would spring the trap so I could profit from the chaos. Fedra had shown up, but the old fox was too careful to take the bait either. So much for that plan. Just as I was about to leave, things changed. A scout galloped in from outside the forest and entered the town. Minutes later, the gates erupted with movement. Heavy cavalry poured out, fully armored riders in iron plate, 5 abreast, charging toward the forest's edge. I counted them. 3,000 heavy cavalry. Behind them marched waves of infantry, all in full iron armor. This was royal class elite. The absolute best. Norrell broke into a cold sweat beside me. If we'd actually attacked that town, we would have been slaughtered. Fedra saw it too from his camp. I'm sure he was just as relieved he hadn't charged in. Those were Rima's royal household troops. And they were heading out of the forest, toward the open plains. Toward King Zeluk the 13th. Only a target that big would justify deploying the entire royal guard. And judging by the birds scattering from multiple directions deep in the forest, this wasn't just one force. Several armies were converging. This was a coordinated trap aimed at the king himself. Zeluk had 5,000 guards and 2,000 knights with him. But Rima had clearly committed far more than that, and there was no way to warn him in time. The king didn't bring enough guards. He could be in danger, Norrell said. He was right. Norrance was stronger overall, but Rima had clearly gone all in. Zeluk the 13th had treated this as a routine raid and brought a modest force. The birds scattering across the forest told us Rima was making a massive move. Of course, Norrell also knew our 250 infantry and 50 cavalry wouldn't make a dent against those royal-class troops. They were genuine elite, at least as good as my men, probably better in raw physical ability. Zeluk did have dukes and counts with him, so he should be able to retreat safely. Unless there was a traitor. That's what I was thinking. Norrance never attacked on a fixed schedule, yet Rima had an ambush ready. Someone must have leaked the plan. But there was no time to dwell on it. Once Rima's forces left, that town was genuinely empty now. My lord, this is our chance, Norrell said, eager to raid the abandoned town before Fedra beat us to it. But I was thinking bigger. How far is George Fortress from here? Norrell looked confused. Less than half a day's march. We advanced toward George Fortress. Sir? I could tell his first thought was that I'd lost my mind. But then he understood. George Fortress, the mightiest stronghold on the northern continent, had to be nearly empty right now. They'd sent their elite to ambush Zeluk. Nobody in their wildest dreams would expect a tiny force to charge straight at their headquarters during their own offensive. It was insane. We had no siege equipment. Just 300 men. But the logic was sound. If there was ever a time the fortress was vulnerable, it was now. Norrell made the call. All units, drop everything except horse armor and lances. Full speed to George Fortress. Behind us, Fedra charged into the empty town instead. He rounded up over 1,000 civilians, seized grain and supplies, and considered it a huge win. He noticed I'd disappeared, but was too busy counting his profits to care. Meanwhile, out on the plains, everything had gone wrong for Zeluk. The startled birds had tipped him off, but his arrogance blinded him. He'd never lost a battle as king and didn't respect Rima enough. So when 2 right-wing dukes and their counts suddenly turned on him, attacking his own forces from within. Ziluk's mind went blank. His own nobles had betrayed him. The loyal royal guard immediately surrounded the king with their anti-magic-coated steel shields. At least there were no enemy mages nearby, and the chaos made archers useless. But the right-wing faction's forces, 30 to 40,000 strong, had turned traitor. Years of tension between the left and right factions had finally exploded. "Your Majesty, you must retreat," the royal knight commander shouted. Ziluk snapped awake. In the distance, a tsunami of Rima heavy cavalry was bearing down. Over 50,000 riders, the ground shaking under their charge. Even the royal guard spear formations couldn't hold against that. The left-wing nobles, led by Duke Simon, fought hard to create an escape corridor. Whatever their political differences, they weren't traitors. They understood that killing Ziluk here wouldn't change anything. His adult son would inherit, and 20,000 royal knights still waited back at the capital. This would only trigger a full-scale war between kingdoms. Once Ziluk escaped, Duke Simon and the left-wing leaders fled too, abandoning their common soldiers. Those abandoned men had no choice but to fight to the death. Dropping weapons now just meant being trampled by heavy cavalry. The cruelest irony was reserved for the right-wing traitors themselves. They'd been promised coordination with Rima, a neat inside-outside attack. Instead, Rima's cavalry charged through everyone indiscriminately, crushing rebel and loyalist alike. The traitorous nobles died without understanding what had happened. They'd been played. Rima had never intended to spare them. The forced march to George Fortress took a heavy toll on my men. Running in full iron armor for half a day would have broken most armies, but my soldiers' training and decent meals kept them going. When the fortress finally came into view, I called a halt. George Fortress was even bigger than Furnace Bridge. Massive walls, noble banners everywhere, and one oversized royal flag that caught my eye. If a member of the Rima royal family was still inside rather than out chasing Ziluk, this place held a very big fish. But my heart sank. The gates were open, yet the walls were packed with soldiers, all with stats as high as those Traptown guards. Strong, dangerous, and backed by rows of loaded ballistas. One wrong move, and we'd be turned into pincushions. I'd abandoned everything for this gamble. I'd thrown away the head trophies we'd collected for war credits. I'd skipped the easy town that Fedra grabbed. If I went home empty-handed, I'd be a laughingstock, the baron who brought elite troops to the campaign and got nothing. Storming the fortress was suicide. Staying hidden in the forest was risky too. A patrol could spot a few hundred men easily. I was about to give the order to retreat. Then 5 riders emerged from the fortress gates. Leading them was a young man in golden armor, riding under a Rima royal banner. A fat nobleman was chatting him up, and a slender knight rode beside them. I checked the young man's stats. I'm Peter, Marshal, 30, Strategy, 60. Talents, Royal Pressure, Royal Etiquette. Rating, C. No loyalty score at all, the first time I'd seen that. His skills screamed royalty, and they were riding straight toward my hiding spot. My pulse quickened. If I could capture a prince and escape back to Luika territory, that would be the greatest war achievement imaginable. Even if Ziluk died out there, bringing home a Rima prince would earn me a viscountcy at minimum. I signaled Norrell silently, ambush when they get close. Take them alive, I whispered. That one in gold is probably a Rima prince. Norrell's eyes went wide with excitement. Capturing a prince would give him bragging rights for the rest of his life. He gripped his sword tight. The fat nobleman, Count Vayan, was telling the prince about rare deer in the forest, trying to lure him on a hunt. The slender knight spoke up cautiously. Count Vayan, there's a battle going on. Is it safe to just ride out like this? The count laughed it off. Ziluk is already surrounded. Our scouts are probably bringing victory news right now. The nearest fighting is half a day away. What are the odds some Norrance dog appears here? They entered the forest. A tripwire snapped taut. The lead riders crashed to the ground, and my soldiers finished them instantly with their swords. Before the prince, the count, and the slender knight could react, their horses stumbled over the same trap. They hit the dirt hard, and blades were at their throats in seconds. Don't move. The royal escort died without making much noise. Elite riders, yes, but they'd never expected an ambush at their own doorstep. Norrell looked over our 3 prisoners. The prince, the bloated count, and the skinny knight. Something about the knight seemed off, too small, too delicate, even for a thin person. Before Norrell could start questioning them, I walked over and checked their panels. The prints I'd already seen. The count was nothing special, but the slim knight made me freeze. Ein Veil, Martial, 40, Strategy, 80. Talents, Royal Etiquette, Alchemy Mastery. Rating, A. Ein Veil. The name matched the prince's family name. This wasn't a knight. This was a princess disguised as a man. I'd come fishing for one big catch and hooked two. Take all three. We're heading back to the territory immediately. Yes, my lord. Norrell pointed at the knight. What about this one? Should we? He drew a finger across his throat. The princess lay on the ground, eyes burning with humiliation and defiance, glaring at me like she wanted to stab me with her stare alone. Even facing death, she refused to show fear. I smiled. Kill a prize like this? Not a chance. No killing. Tie them all up. Put this knight on my horse. It's the strongest. The prince goes with you. Yes, my lord. Norrell roughly bound the princess and tossed her onto my horse. Even Prince Ein Peter looked stunned. How did this stranger know he was royalty? But he didn't dare make a sound. Behind us, George Fortress stood with its gates wide open. A paradise the prince would never return to. The autumn campaign ended in disaster for Norrance. King Zeluk XIII was furious, his first defeat in 23 years of rule, and it came at the hands of Rima. Tens of thousands of soldiers lost, and he'd nearly been killed himself. The aftermath was brutal. The two right-wing dukes who'd betrayed him were hunted down along with their families and every count who'd joined the rebellion. The entire right-wing faction was wiped out in a bloody purge. The left wing, led by Duke Simon, became the only power in court. The purge also freed up a lot of unclaimed territory from the executed traitors, though nobody dared ask for land grants while Zeluk was still seething. The left-wing nobles pushed for full-scale war against Rima. Zeluk was angry, but not stupid. He knew the two dukes' sudden betrayal felt strange. He wanted payback, but he also had to consider that Yade might attack from behind if Norrance committed everything against Rima. After careful thought, he decided to mobilize 10,000 royal guards from the capital plus the nobles' armies, roughly 300,000 total. Enough to teach Rima a real lesson. Meanwhile, in Rima's royal palace, King Ein Charles wasn't celebrating either. Yes, he'd bloodied Norrance badly, but he knew it was just a scratch to that giant. He'd never expected to actually kill Zeluk, just wanted to send a message. Then his people told him that his second prince and beloved princess had vanished. He exploded. How could they lose two royals? George Fortress was supposed to be impenetrable. Count Vayan was missing too, along with dead escort knights found in the nearby forest. Someone had actually crept up to the fortress and kidnapped his children. Even the crown prince stayed silent. Losing royal family members was a humiliation for the entire dynasty. Charles took a deep breath. His foolish son he could live without. But his gifted daughter, a mid-level mage at just 16, he absolutely had to get back. The absurd reality was that right after winning a battle, he'd now have to send diplomats to negotiate. As for me, the one who caused all this chaos, I was sitting comfortably in my camp, studying my prize. Princess Ein Veil glared at me with her sapphire blue eyes, gray hair disheveled, absolutely seething. The long ride, draped over my horse, had left her stomach aching. And yes, I'd smacked her backside a few times during the journey to keep her from squirming. She wanted to kill me. So, brave lady knight, what's your name? I asked, smiling. Veil, she answered through gritted teeth. Her rear still stung. I reached toward her, and she instinctively flinched away. Her body had already learned to fear my hand. Relax, Ein Veil. Her eyes went wide when I used her full name. Her last hope, that I didn't know who she really was, shattered. She assumed I must have intelligence contacts inside Rima. After all, what kind of lunatic charges deep into enemy territory with just 300 men without any intel? If Norrance had traitors in its ranks, Rima surely had moles too. What do you want? She asked coldly. I tilted her chin up with one finger. Nothing much. I've heard King Ein Charles has a genius daughter. Barely 16 and already a mid-level mage. The pride of the Ein family, she tried to struggle against her ropes. I reminded her, the rope was enchanted, bought in the capital. It blocked magical energy. Not that it mattered. Mages can't cast without a wand anyway. Her tone softened. Let me and my brother go. Rima will reward you generously. I laughed. Or I could hand you to the king of Norrance, who's currently in a very bad mood. You know what he'd do with a Rima princess right now? Think carefully, Einvale. You don't want him to find out about you, do you? King Ziluk XIII was still fuming when Rima's messenger arrived. He almost didn't bother listening, but even Norrance doesn't kill foreign diplomats. At first the messenger's words made no sense. Then came the question that changed everything. What conditions would you accept to return our prince and princess? Ziluk's expression turned strange. He had no idea what they were talking about, but he played along. If agreeing meant free gains, why not? Of course, we'll treat your royals with proper courtesy, he said smoothly. Rima offered the Bigra grasslands, that whole plain beyond Furnace Bridge where only a few shepherds lived. Ziluk pushed harder. Everything outside George Fortress. All of it. That was nearly a tenth of Rima's entire territory. The messenger's face turned pale, but he said he'd relay the demand. After the envoy left, Ziluk sat there trying to figure out what had actually happened. Someone from his side had apparently kidnapped 2 Rima royals right from George Fortress's doorstep. But who? All his dukes and counts had been with him during the battle. Could some bold viscount have pulled this off? Or a baron? He couldn't work it out, but he figured whoever did it would come to claim credit soon enough. And even if nobody showed up, well, threatening war was something Norrance excelled at. The narrative spun beautifully. Norrance defeats Rima, captures 2 royals, became the official story. The public had no idea the campaign had actually been a disaster. Baron Fedra, meanwhile, was putting the pieces together and not liking the picture. He'd been in that forest too. He'd watched me ignore the empty town and disappear. Then came news of captured royals. There was only one person who could have done it, me. With just 300 soldiers. He couldn't figure out how, but the timing and location pointed only at me. If I really had captured those royals, my career was about to explode. The lifelong merchant had missed the deal of a lifetime. The son-in-law with extraordinary ability and unbelievable courage, thrown away over a closed door and a cold dinner invitation. Just as Ziluk predicted, I loaded the Ein's siblings and Count Vayan onto a carriage and headed straight for the capital. 50 knights and Norrell escorted me. My tall northern warhorses turned plenty of heads on the road. The whole city was buzzing about which mysterious noble had captured the Rima royals, but nobody dared falsely claim credit for something this big. The registration clerk at the palace remembered me from my last visit with the gladiator's crest. He noticed my fully armed knights and expensive horses outside. I tossed him a gold coin. Please inform His Majesty I'd like an audience. I've brought him a gift. He looked past me at 2 angry young people, bound, glaring, but silent. His eyes went wide. The hero everyone had been talking about. Was this young baron? He ran off to deliver the message. I didn't wait long. I knelt before King Ziluk XIII. He studied me carefully, the same baron who'd once traded family honor for 1,000 gold coins. Baron Lin Wei Luika. Raise your head. I looked up. Behind me stood Count Vayan and the Ein siblings. Ziluk could barely contain his joy. With these 2 as hostages, a massive chunk of Rima's territory was practically his. But confusion flickered across his face. How had a baron with a few hundred men reached George Fortress, deep inside enemy territory, and snatched 2 royals without a scratch? Was I secretly some grand magus? He glanced to the side, and I noticed someone unexpected. Dean Aliyah, the legendary elf mage, was sitting in the throne room. She never attended court. Yet here she was, studying me with sharp, curious eyes. I later learned that academy students had reported my arrival in the capital, and she'd connected the dots immediately. A fully armed Baron Laika arriving from the frontier, heading straight for the palace. It had to be the hero behind the kidnapping. Saruka's master was interested in me. Very interested. To my surprise, Rima actually agreed to Ziluk's outrageous demands. Taking that entire forest by force would have been a nightmare. Hidden scouts in tree houses and underground tunnels, endless guerrilla fighting. The cost of war might have outweighed the gains. But thanks to me, Ziluk got it all for free. The king even had me personally escort the 2 royals to the handover point. We rode to Furnace Bridge, where about 100 Rima heavy cavalry waited to receive them. Those armored riders glared at me with pure hatred. If I'd gone one step closer, I'd probably have become their prisoner. Princess Einvale stared at me with murderous blue eyes. When I raised my hand casually, she flinched and moved her horse away. apparently remembering the spanking from the ride. I couldn't help but think the experience had been rather bouncy. Count Vane got no ceremony at all. Still bound, he was dumped on the ground like a sack. He didn't dare make a sound. Linwei Luika, the princess called out as she turned to leave. I'll remember you. If we ever meet on the battlefield and I catch you, I'll treat you very well. She practically spat those last words. Prince Peter was calmer. Setting aside our positions as enemies, he seemed to respect my courage and cunning. He knew this capture had cost him his shot at the throne, but he didn't seem to care much. He'd only been competing because his mother wanted it. Linwei, I hope we meet again. They rode off toward the Rima escort, and I turned away with what I hoped was a cool, confident exit. The king's reward came next, a viscount title and a massive territory the size of an earl's domain. It was land confiscated from one of the purged right-wing nobles, located far from Luika territory, closer to the Beastman tribes in the south. Everyone understood I was being groomed for an earldom eventually. I just needed one more notable achievement, whether a battle victory or a gladiator tournament win. But honestly, this reward gave me a massive headache. I'd expected maybe a small viscount territory. Instead, I got a huge chunk of land that was probably in terrible shape, far from my home base, and I had zero administrative staff to manage it. I didn't even have an administrator for Luika territory yet. Bigland's weapon sales couldn't possibly fund 2 ruined territories at once. And the king hadn't given me a single gold coin in startup money. He apparently expected me to work miracles again. I left Luika territory's daily affairs to the old butler and Norrell. My knight was now handling both military training and governance, basically doing a baron's job under a knight's title. He accepted gladly. He could read the political landscape clearly. With the right-wing faction destroyed, the left wing dominated everything. But Norrell understood that a king wouldn't tolerate one faction growing stronger than the crown. The left wing might become the next target. Zeluk would need a new balancing force, and I was the obvious candidate, a fresh noble with no factional ties, proven ability, and a clean background. Giving me earl-sized territory with only a viscount's rank was the king's way of investing in me. Meanwhile, Saruka heard about my promotion at the Magic Academy. She was thrilled that I'd become a viscount with a major military achievement. But she also worried. 2 territories and no one to manage them? She briefly considered studying administration to help me, but quickly refocused. Becoming a magus had to come first. As my status grew, she needed to become strong enough to stand beside me. Then she had an idea. Maybe her teacher, the legendary Dean Aaliyah, could help me somehow, with money or talented people. Aaliyah was one of the most powerful figures on the continent. Surely she had resources to spare? The thought made Saruka almost giddy with excitement. Back at the academy, Aaliyah had already guessed what Saruka wanted before she even asked. The old elf had shown up at the throne room that day on purpose, not to speak, but to send a message. Smart nobles like Count Pharaohs would notice that the legendary Grand Magus had taken an interest in me. Zeluk would notice too. Aaliyah's silent appearance was worth more than words. What Aaliyah probably didn't expect was that Pharaohs had jumped to the conclusion that she and I were somehow related, maybe that I was her secret son. Well, whatever worked. Over tea, Aaliyah told Saruka her verdict. Linwei is impressive. She'd stopped calling me the little baron. One meeting was enough to raise her opinion significantly. She saw me as someone with real courage and ability. Combined with Saruka being head over heels for me, she figured I could go far. Maybe even carve out my own kingdom someday. My only weakness was having no magical talent. But with Saruka, that gap was covered. I'll send some freelance mages to serve him, Aaliyah said. Consider it an early wedding gift. Saruka's face turned bright red. Teacher, please don't say things like that in front of Linwei. As for money, Saruka trusted me to handle it. After all, I'd managed to pay 5,000 gold for her enrollment and 20,000 for advanced studies without missing a single coin. If I could do that from a tiny barren territory, she believed I could work miracles with more resources. Even Aaliyah found herself looking forward to watching my story unfold. Witnessing the rise of a legend. Not a bad way to pass the centuries. Business was going well. Bigland and his helpers had become a relentless money machine, churning out swords for the Far East Trading Company. After paying Saruka's tuition, I still had about 30,000 gold coins saved up. but I knew it wasn't nearly enough for what lay ahead. The new territory, formerly called St. Martin, now renamed New Luika, was an Earl-sized domain with no guards, no administration, nothing. Just some leftover maids in an empty castle. So for this first visit, I brought all my cavalry and 50 of my best infantry. I had the riders put on their full horse armor before entering. First impressions matter. The territory was in worse shape than expected in some ways, but better in others. Abandoned farmland and overgrown mines lined the road, but unlike old Luika territory, this land was actually fertile. I saw dry fields, croplands, and even orchards. This place could feed itself without imports, a huge advantage. It was close to the Beastman territories in the south, which explained the rich soil. The previous Earl had clearly been lazy and wasted all this potential. The town itself was far more developed than anything I was used to. Merchants, vendors, proper buildings, a church, taverns, and even a branch of the Adventurers Guild. Adventurers meant capable fighters passing through regularly, and with my ability to see people's talents, this place was a goldmine for recruitment. Yahello sat in the carriage beside me, looking around wide-eyed. She was happy for me, but I could sense something else beneath her smile. As my status rose, my future wife would need to be someone of equal standing. A maid couldn't become a baron's wife, let alone a viscount's. She'd already resigned herself to serving me and my future spouse, but that didn't stop the quiet ache in her heart. The jealousy of a childhood friend who could never be more. My fully armored troops made the right impression on the locals. Merchants, adventurers, and various small-time powers in the territory all straightened up when they saw my heavy cavalry and elite guards march through. The man who'd captured 2 Rima royals with 300 soldiers was no pushover, and my equipment made that crystal clear. As we approached St. Martin Castle, I couldn't help but whistle. 2 stories tall, a massive estate with gardens, fountains, artificial hills, and manicured grounds. Over 50 maids stood in 2 neat rows at the entrance. In perfect unison, they bowed and said, "Welcome home, Lord Linway." Damn, being a noble really is something. First thing I needed to do in New Luika territory was take over the city defenses. My 100 soldiers looked pretty thin spread across those wide walls. I needed to recruit new troops, militia, and supply workers fast. I instinctively reached for Norrell, then remembered he was back at old Luika territory. I'd have to handle everything myself. My talent pool was painfully shallow. The guards had improved their martial stats through training, but none had broken past 60, and their strategy scores hadn't budged. No special talents either. Their ceiling was limited. Maybe the slave market could help. New Luika was an Earl-sized territory, so it had a proper slave trading house. I left Yahello behind. I'd promoted her to head maid of New Luika, tasked with training the 50 existing maids on my preferences. She'd return to my side once they were up to speed. I stepped out of the manor with 2 guards, and almost immediately ran into a man in a black cloak standing at my gate. He pulled back his hood. Handsome face, wavy brown hair parted in the middle, brown eyes like a normal Norrance person, but his ears were slightly pointed. Half-elf. Esteemed Viscount Linway, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Narencel. I'm a half-elf, a wandering mage, and I've come to serve you. I looked at his stats. Narencel, martial, 20, strategy, 103, loyalty, 80. Talents, minor elemental affinity, advanced mage. Rating, A. Normally I'd be suspicious. A high-level mage could serve dukes, or even kings. Why come to a freshly promoted viscount? But his loyalty was already at 80, higher than Aquina or Saruka when they first arrived. That made no sense unless someone had sent him. Did I really have that much personal charm? Whatever the reason, 80 loyalty meant I had nothing to worry about. "Welcome, esteemed mage," I said without a single question. He looked stunned. He'd prepared himself for interrogation, maybe even rejection. He didn't know that I could see his loyalty score. What I didn't know yet was that Aaliyah had sent him, disguised as a wanderer. She'd specifically told him to pretend he came on his own. I called the butler and had him show Narencel to the manor, telling the mage he could pick any room he liked. Narencel went along, probably thinking I'd mistaken him for a beginner mage. He'd prove his worth soon enough. Walking away with a free advanced mage, I was in an excellent mood. I headed to the slave trading house. A fat manager came out to greet me with a big smile. He couldn't believe the famous Viscount, who'd captured 2 Rima royals, was so young. What kind of slaves are you looking for, Viscount? Combat type? Companion type? We also have rare species, dragonborn, lizard folk. This continent had all sorts of races, including semi-human types with enormous strength but limited intelligence. Expensive and hard to tame. Show me the human slaves, I said. He led me through a long corridor to a large room. The slaves here looked healthier than Saruka and Aquina had when I'd first found them. Most were Rima, or Yade people. Rima's blue eyes and gray hair reminded me of a certain princess. Very bouncy memories. Yade people had dark hair and brownish skin. I scanned the room. Stats were all low, nothing worth investing in. No special talents either. Not impressed, I told the fat man. He rubbed his hands together and leaned in. Viscount, I do have something special. A rare specimen I was planning to send to auction. But since you're already here, interested in taking a look? I guarantee you won't be disappointed. What race? He gave me a look that said every man would understand. A succubus. I swear I didn't follow the fat merchant to see the succubus because I was interested in her body. I was just curious about a race I'd seen in countless games and anime back on Earth. He led me to a room with 5 individual cages, 4 female succubi and 1 male. They had small wings on their backs and smooth black tails. Succubi come from the eastern continent and have their own nation. They're rare in Norrance, which makes them luxury goods here. Most of them had decent stats, martial and strategy around 40 to 50, but no special talents. I was about to leave disappointed when my eyes landed on the last cage. My pupils contracted. I nearly lost my composure. Bitey, martial, 23 abnormal, strategy, 182 abnormal, affinity, 0, talents, dragon tamer, dragon slayer, empress, transmigrator. Rating, S. I thought my eyes were broken. She was unconscious, her stats were flagged as abnormal, and even in that state she rated S, the first S rank I'd ever seen. Those 4 talents were absolutely insane. And that last one, transmigrator. Was she from Earth too? I forced myself to stay calm. How much for these succubi? I asked casually. The fat man grinned. 10,000 gold for females, 12,000 for males. They come from the distant eastern continent, and these are all good-looking specimens. He pointed at Bitey's cage. That one in the 5th cage is the most beautiful, but she keeps falling unconscious. Could be some illness. I'd recommend the other 3 instead. I'll take her, I said, pointing at Bitey. Only she was worth that price tag. The others didn't even come close. 10,000 gold coins. Painful. And the fat man didn't offer a single coin discount. I'd been hoping he would. Outside the slave market, I stretched. This whole trip had yielded exactly 1 purchase. Finding high-value people among slaves was harder than I'd thought. I was getting pickier. Average stats didn't interest me anymore. I needed either high numbers or rare talents. Maybe I should visit the Royal Knight Reserve again. Those were guaranteed elite candidates. But getting the king's permission for another pick wouldn't be easy. Instead of going straight home, I stopped at the church and hired a priest to look at Bitey. I didn't know what was causing her abnormal status, but priests specialize in healing and dispelling. I'd actually wanted a permanent priest on staff for a while. They can heal soldiers using magical energy, making them as rare and valuable as mages. But none had volunteered, and building a church to get one assigned would cost hundreds of thousands of gold. I'd have to check the Adventurers Guild for freelance priests later. For now, I had militia to recruit. I spread the word. 1 silver coin enlistment bonus, guaranteed brand-bred daily rations, and real equipment for those who made the cut. For commoners used to eating rock-hard black bread, brand bread was a luxury. Add in my reputation as the man who captured 2 Rima royals, plus the sight of my fully armored soldiers, and volunteers came flooding in. By afternoon, I'd recruited about 1,000 men. Among them, 2 brothers caught my attention. Action, martial, 67, strategy, 60, loyalty, 70. Talents, eagle eye, archery mastery. Enro, martial, 65, strategy, 70, loyalty, 70. Talents, eagle eye, archery mastery. Both were hunter-farmers, famous marksmen in their village who could take down deer working as a team. They joined because of my reputation. Norrance respects strength, and my name carried real weight now. Once they saw the pay and rations I offered, far better than any other lord. They were completely sold. I promoted both brothers to squad leaders on the spot and had them start morning runs with the new recruits. The old Earl's training grounds behind the manor had enough barracks for over 3,000 soldiers, so space wasn't an issue. I'd need to bring Norrell over from Luika territory to handle proper training, since I certainly couldn't do it myself. That would leave old Luika without a commander temporarily, but things were peaceful enough for now. Bidey, the succubus, finally woke up after a full week of unconsciousness. Yahello was there to greet her. The priest I'd hired couldn't figure out what was wrong with her, but her condition had been slowly improving on its own. What I didn't know yet was that Bidey was no ordinary succubus. She'd been the empress of the succubus nation for over 300 years. Her elders and trusted advisors had betrayed her, nearly killing her with a curse. She'd barely escaped to the northern continent. She'd also cast a clever little spell on herself. Anyone below Grand Magus level who tried to take advantage of her while she was unconscious would instantly forget what they were doing. Smart. She also had a symbiotic contract with a powerful frost dragon, whose regenerative power was slowly purging the curse from her body. Once she recovered, she planned to go back and hang every last traitor. When Yahello brought her food, potato soup, a meat and vegetable stew, and white bread, Bidey recognized it as special treatment, far above what an ordinary slave would get. After 300 years among humans, she knew exactly how ugly nobles could be. But food was food. She wasn't worried about poison either, thanks to her protective spell. I'd prepared this meal specifically for her. Even I couldn't afford to eat this well every day. Meat stew was a luxury, but I needed to build her trust, so I didn't hold back. Meanwhile, Norrell had come over from Luika territory to teach Action and Enro his training methods. Those two brothers learned fast. Norrell was impressed and a bit amazed at my ability to spot talent in a crowd. After 2 days he headed back, and the 1,000 new soldiers began their routine, slashing, thrusting, and sparring with wooden swords. Norrell also shipped over 1,000 fresh longswords from Biglin. As for armor, I'd buy it from the Far East Trading Company. Biglin could make armor too, but a full suit took too long. His time was better spent forging swords to sell. Money was getting tight again. Biglin's output couldn't keep up with the cost of arming a large force. The territory's tax revenue only left a few hundred gold per month after expenses. That was nothing. I wanted heavy cavalry, a mage guard, maybe even a griffin rider corps someday. But even King Ziluk only had a few thousand griffin riders, the ultimate trump card, never deployed except in major wars. Dreams were expensive. Young master, the succubus lady is awake, Yahello said behind me. Take care of her, I replied. I was curious about Bidey, especially that transmigrator talent, but I had something more pressing. Count Pharaohs had shown up for a visit. I'd only seen this man twice during the autumn campaign. I had no idea why he was here, but he was a count, and I was only a viscount. I couldn't be rude. Esteemed Count Pharaohs, a pleasure to meet you. Likewise, Viscount Linway. He smiled warmly despite waiting half an hour for me. He studied me carefully. I got the feeling he was looking for some kind of connection between me and Aaliyah. He didn't find any elf features, just my golden hair, which isn't that unusual in Norrits. After pleasantries, he got to business. I'd like to establish a trade relationship with New Luika territory. Allow my merchant caravans to do business here. That seemed too simple for a personal visit. His own territory was near the capital with better markets. New Luika was far away and close to the Beastman border. What was he really after? Before I could puzzle it out, he dropped the real offer. If you agree, the 300 northern warhorses I brought along are yours. A gift of friendship, 300 horses. At 300 gold each, that was 90,000 gold coins. I nearly choked. Was I his long-lost son or something? Seeing my confusion, he added, Miss Saruka has been tutoring my daughter in magic. Consider this a thank you for her help. Please don't refuse. Everything clicked. He knew about my connection to Saruka, and by extension, to Aaliyah. This gift was really him currying favor with the legendary Grand Magus through me. Of course, no noble just hands over 90,000 gold worth of horses for nothing. But hey, if he was offering, I wasn't going to say no. After Count Pharaohs left, I felt good about our meeting. We'd gotten along well. I knew I shouldn't get too close to the left-wing faction. If they ever fell from grace like the right wing just did, anyone associated with them would go down too. But Pharaohs didn't seem to be recruiting me for the left wing. He was acting on his own, trying to build a personal connection through Saruka and Aliyah. And those 300 warhorses were already mine. No way I was giving them back. With 1,000 soldiers and 300 horses, I could now build a proper heavy cavalry force. Though honestly, 1,000 troops was still embarrassingly small for an Earl-sized territory. I needed at least 5,000 to look legitimate. But soldiers cost money, and I still hadn't figured out my next income source. I went to check on Baidi. She was prettier than I'd expected. When I walked in, she was reading one of my books by the window, sunlight falling on her flax-colored hair. Her little black wings, about 2 palms wide, sat on her back, and her round black tail swayed in an oddly rhythmic pattern, curling and swishing like it had a mind of its own. She still wore the slave collar, though I suspected it meant nothing to her. And she didn't call me master. "Hello," I said casually. "Hello, Viscount Linway," she replied. I didn't correct her on the title thing. I knew from her panel that she was an empress, a dragon tamer, and a dragon slayer. Picking a fight with someone like that would be incredibly stupid. We chatted briefly about the book she was reading. She spoke with this effortless mix of laziness and elegance, zero slave mentality whatsoever. That made sense for someone who'd been a queen, and a transmigrator who'd lived here for over 300 years. "Make yourself at home," I told her, and left. I didn't push for information, just establishing a presence, letting her get comfortable. Her affinity score was still low, and I hadn't figured out how to raise it yet. No rush. What I didn't see was that after I left, her affinity toward me went up 5 points. Apparently, just treating her like a normal person instead of property was enough to make an impression. Winter was coming fast. Tiny snowflakes were already drifting from gray skies. Norrant's winters are brutal. Heavy snow buries every road for months. If farmers didn't stockpile enough food in autumn, they could starve. Unlike old Luika territory, which had no farmland at all, New Luika actually had crops and orchards. That meant I had farmers to look after now. I had the butler post an announcement. Anyone willing to work at the manor during winter would receive 3 copper coins per day and 3 meals. That was enough to draw every farmer in the area. There was plenty of work, feeding horses, shoveling snow, helping the kitchen prepare food for 1,000 soldiers. These were jobs the 50 maids had been doing alone under the previous earl, working from dawn to exhaustion. I changed that. Maids only handled castle cleaning now. Compared to the old Earl of St. Martin, I must have seemed like an angel. Their gratitude translated directly into loyalty. I could have just given the farmers free food, but I didn't want them to see it as charity. People value what they earn. So I created jobs instead. It was a compromise. Keep people alive through winter while preserving their dignity. If I wanted to grow this territory, recruit more soldiers next year, and build something lasting, I needed more than a reputation for bravery. I needed to be known as a lord who actually cared about his people. Most nobles here squeeze every last drop out of their commoners. Growing up on Earth gave me a very different perspective on that. Even now, sitting above everyone in the social hierarchy, I couldn't bring myself to act like the nobles here do. The first snow covered New Luika territory in white overnight. Outside the manor, I could hear children playing among the cooking smoke. Exactly the kind of warmth I wanted for this place. The snow wasn't deep enough to block travel yet, but in a month or two, the roads would be buried for the next 4 months of winter. My boots crunched through the fresh snow as I stepped outside. Elialu hurried after me with a gray cloak, her cheeks pink from the cold. She was bundled up in a heavy coat over her maid outfit, hiding all the pleasant views I usually enjoyed. A small loss. Farmers were already showing up for winter work at the manor. I walked to the training grounds behind the estate and watched the new soldiers drill. Their base stats were actually decent. Most were young men with martial values around 30. With proper training, they'd hit 50 easily, probably surpassing my original guards who'd been mostly middle-aged. Akshin and Enro were working the hardest. Being promoted to squad leaders had lit a fire under them. If they kept performing, knighthood was practically guaranteed. The other recruits pushed themselves too. Nobody wanted to slack off in front of me. The silver coins and bran bread I'd promised were delivered without fail. For men who'd grown up on black bread, this was luxury. Up on the walls, my original veterans saluted me with genuine respect. These were the men who'd been there when I captured the Rima royals. They believed in me now, maybe a bit too much. They'd started treating my decisions as almost divine, convinced that following me meant victory. When they went off duty to the tavern and told their war stories, the local civilians hung on every word. It fed their pride nicely. From the walls I could see the landscape, snow-covered fields, a line of low forest with hunter cabins, and beyond that a wide, fast-moving river full of piranha, a natural barrier. On the other side was Beastman territory. The Otto tribe used to cross that river regularly to raid us, but they'd been quiet for nearly 10 years now. That silence bothered me. The calmer the sea, the bigger the storm hiding underneath. Meanwhile, at the Magic Academy, Saruka had earned her advanced mage certification. She'd entered the academy in late summer and achieved what most people never accomplish in a lifetime, all before winter even set in. Her instructor Ranne handed her the badge with a proud smile. "You might become the youngest Grand Magus this continent has ever seen," Ranne told her. Saruka just smiled. Grand Magus felt far away. What mattered right now was that Aaliyah had promised her a week's vacation once she reached advanced rank. She could come home. Unfortunately, with the roads buried in snow, she'd have to wait until spring. She'd even asked Aaliyah about teleportation magic, and the old elf had flicked her on the head. "Don't go poking around forbidden spells." Then an unwelcome voice interrupted her day. "Miss Saruka, I've finally found you. You're as beautiful as a rose in bloom. One look and I'm lost." It was Prince Michel, one of Zeluk's younger sons and a student at the academy. Ever since Saruka's rise to fame, he'd been obsessively pursuing her. He'd even confessed publicly in front of the entire school. She'd rejected him flat, but he kept engineering coincidental meetings no matter how many times she turned him down. "Prince Michel, I've told you already. I'm focused on my studies. I'm not interested in romance right now." That wasn't entirely true. She just wasn't interested in him. None of these nobles had spared her a glance before she proved her talent. Only one person had believed in her when she was at her lowest. She'd already decided her future belonged beside me. "Your voice is as lovely as ever," Michel said with a practiced smile. "You just don't know me well enough yet. I'll be back." He didn't dare push harder. His father had warned him repeatedly never to offend Duchess Aaliyah. Michel was confident, though. Good looks, royal blood, relentless persistence. He figured a sheltered girl like Saruka would eventually fall for his sincerity. What he really wanted was Saruka's power to help him compete with his older brother for the throne. She was a chess piece to him, not a person. He had no idea he'd already lost before the game even started. Coming down from the walls, I bumped into Narencel, my new mage. He'd been holed up in his room studying magic since he arrived, and he was bored out of his mind. "Narencel, interested in being my administrator?" I asked. He shook his head. "I'm a magic researcher, not a bureaucrat. But I could train magic apprentices for you, if you find suitable candidates." Fair point. Magic students needed high strategy scores and ideally special talents, or the investment in time and gold wouldn't pay off. I agreed, but the money problem nagged at me again. I couldn't just conjure another biglin out of thin air. His Courage Forge inheritance made him one of a kind. Ordinary dwarf smiths couldn't match his quality. Winter turned out to be harder than I expected. I'd thought hiring farmers for winter work would carry everyone through, but the castle's food supplies ran dangerously low. The previous earl's stores had been cleaned out during the purge, leaving almost nothing. My butler suggested cutting off the farmers to save food for the garrison. I couldn't do that. I'd built a reputation for both strength and kindness. Backing out now would destroy the trust I'd worked to earn. Starting something and quitting halfway was worse than never starting at all. I came up with a solution: hunting. The snow-covered forest was full of rabbits, mice, and deer. I sent my 1,000 soldiers in with longbows. It doubled as training. Between them and the local hunters, the forest was nearly stripped bare by winter's end. The hunters would have a lean season because of it, but they'd always been the wealthiest group in the territory anyway. Next winter, I'd prepare better. This wouldn't happen again. Spring finally arrived. The snow melted and I could breathe again. I'd barely kept my promise. We needed to plant more wheat and stockpile food for the future. Action and Enro had improved impressively over winter. Action was at Martial 79 and Enro at 75, still below Normal, but solidly above most Royal Knight Reserve members. The 1,000 new soldiers had all reached around 40 in martial strength and could swing Bigland's heavy swords freely. 300 of them had been training in horsemanship for the cavalry. The only thing missing was real combat experience. Without bandits nearby, I couldn't give them a baptism by fire. Meanwhile, back at Luika territory, Saruka came home. The moment the snow melted enough for travel, she jumped on a carriage heading to Luika territory. She was a certified advanced mage now, wearing her own mage robes and carrying a proper wand, gifts from Aaliyah. A small escort of elite guards traveled with her, also arranged by Aaliyah. Not that she needed them. A single advanced mage could handle hundreds of armored soldiers on an open battlefield. Her carriage bore no family crest. Aaliyah's orders: even on a visit home, nobody should connect Saruka to me. It would only bring trouble. She arrived at Luika territory, showed the gate's soldiers her knight's badge, the one I'd given her, and was let through. "Aquina," she called out. The two cat girls reunited with a fierce hug. Aquina's eyes went red. "Saruka, you've changed," Aquina said softly. It was true. The shy, scared girl was gone. Saruka still had her gentle warmth, but the self-doubt and timidity had vanished from her eyes. "Where's the master?" Saruka asked, peeking toward my old quarters. Nora walked in. "He's at New Luika territory." "Didn't you know?" Saruka's face fell. "Of course. I wasn't just a little baron anymore. I was a viscount with a second territory." She'd spent over a day traveling from the capital already, and New Luika was even farther. Her precious week of vacation was shrinking fast. She grabbed Aquina's hand without hesitation. "Come on, let's go find him together." What I didn't know at the time was that trouble was brewing behind the scenes. Prince Michel, the same pest who'd been chasing Saruka at the academy, was plotting something far worse than a failed romance. When his spies told him Saruka had left the capital heading south, he tried to track her but couldn't get close to an advanced mage without being detected. But his real scheme had nothing to do with Saruka. He'd been meeting secretly with a beastman priest named Monreed from the Otto tribe, a dog-headed warrior with sharp fangs and zero respect for human royalty. Michel was the one who'd arranged the right-wing duke's betrayal during the autumn campaign, feeding information to Rima. When his father survived, Michel had to regroup. His new plan: get himself appointed Lord of Blackstone Fortress, the massive defensive stronghold behind my New Luika territory, the only thing keeping the Beastman armies from reaching the capital. Once he controlled it, he'd open the gates for the Otto tribe's invasion. The Beastmen would sweep through to the capital, while Zeluk's main forces were deployed elsewhere occupying the new Rima territories. Michel figured his father and older brother would be overwhelmed before they could react. Blackstone Fortress was as big as Rima's George Fortress. As long as it stood, the Beastmen could never threaten the capital. Michel planned to hand it over on a silver platter. He didn't even consider the smaller nobles between the fortress and the border, including me, as obstacles worth worrying about. The invasion was set for April of next year. Meanwhile, Bidey had been living quietly in my territory all winter. I barely visited her. Most of my energy went to training soldiers and handling administration. But I made sure the kitchen remembered her preferences: potato soup without salt, bread baked extra fluffy. Small things. She noticed. She'd eaten far better as Empress of the Succubi, rare magical beasts served at her table. But she appreciated the gesture. She'd decided that when I truly needed help, she'd repay the kindness. For now, she kept to herself. Over the months, she'd gotten to know the people around her. Yahello, who kept trying to cook with her. The Action brothers, who couldn't string a sentence together around her. The quiet half-elf mage Narencel. Then spring came, and with it, two cat girls she'd never seen before. Saruka arrived clinging to my arm, her tail occasionally wrapping around my calf, then releasing, like she was expressing months of missing me through touch. Aquina tagged along, reunited with Yahello after a whole winter apart. "Are you happy at the academy?" I asked Saruka. I really wanted to ask if anyone had bullied her, but with Aaliyah as her teacher, that seemed unlikely. "Happy," she said, "but not as happy as being with you." I checked her panel and nearly choked. Saruka, Martial, 10, Strategy, 168, Rating, S, Affinity, 100. Talents, Magic Affinity, Wisdom Blessing, Well-Traveled, Advanced Mage. Her strategy had jumped massively. She was rated S now. But her loyalty score had changed too, affinity, same as Baidi's panel used a different metric, and it was maxed at 100. That explained why she was being so physically close. When she'd left, she'd been respectful and a bit shy. Now she was pressing against my arm and didn't seem to care who saw. What exactly had they been teaching at that academy? I had to be honest with myself. I'd never planned to have feelings for Saruka. Paying her tuition, giving her a knight's title, those were all calculated moves to secure her loyalty. I wasn't a good person. I'd bought her from a slave trader with the intention of using her talents. If she hadn't been gifted, she'd still be rotting in a cage somewhere. But somehow, things kept drifting in unexpected directions. "Master, who is this?" Saruka suddenly asked, looking at Baidi. Baidi was caught off guard but recovered gracefully. "I'm Baidi, a slave the Viscount purchased. Nice to meet you, Miss Saruka." Saruka called me master, and Baidi noticed immediately. This cat girl was probably another slave I'd acquired. Yet she was an advanced mage with terrifying talent. I could see Baidi's mind working behind her calm smile. A half-elf high-level mage living in my manor. A genius cat girl mage calling me master. Elite heavy cavalry outside. This wasn't what a typical Viscount's household looked like. She was starting to wonder what kind of person I really was. I'd expected Saruka might try to sneak into my room again. She had a track record. What I didn't expect was Yahello joining in. The two of them stood at my door holding pillows, looking pitiful. "Young master, master," I rubbed my forehead. "Can't sleep?" Saruka nodded. "The wind outside is so loud." Saruka is scared, an advanced mage afraid of wind. Right. Could we at least come up with a better excuse? I looked at Yahello for her reason. I just wanted to remember what it felt like sleeping next to you when we were little. She and I were born on the same day. We grew up together. Until I was 6, I thought she was my sister. Then she put on a maid uniform, and I realized my father had assigned her to me. We'd stopped sharing a bed when we were 10. Both of them were undeniably beautiful. Even someone like me, surrounded by attractive women all the time, had to admit they were exactly my type. Fine. Just this once. I cracked the door open and they darted in like rabbits. The bed was big enough for all three of us, but I don't love sharing sleeping space. I don't even know what my sleeping habits are like. Then again, when pretty girls ask nicely, exceptions get made. I fell asleep weighed down by my usual worries. I had a terrible nightmare. Some furry demon tied up my arms, legs, and neck until I could barely breathe. Then I was thrown into water where slippery little fish kept rubbing against my face. When morning sunlight hit me, I felt like a survivor. The girls were still asleep, and their sleeping positions were impressive. I carefully extracted myself from under the legs and arms draped across me. The head maid had breakfast ready in the hall, toasted white bread with jam. Baidi and Aquina were already at the table. Aquina was just eating normally. Baidi studied me with a strange look, like she was seeing me for the first time. Then Saruka and Yahello both emerged from my bedroom. The head maid said nothing. Aquina's eyes went wide. Baidi relaxed. Apparently this was more in line with her understanding of how human nobles behaved. I sat down with an awkward grin. I wasn't going to explain that nothing happened. And even if something had, I'm a noble, sleeping in my own bed with my own maid. What's the problem? No problem, right? Saruka could only stay 2 days before heading back. Her vacation was already over, and she'd probably arrive a day late as it was. She needed to study Magus-level magic and become someone even Aaliyah fully acknowledged. Then she could return to my side for good, without anyone's permission. "Master, I'm leaving now." She waved and climbed into her carriage with her escort. I kept Aquina here instead of sending her back to Luika territory. The 300 horses from Count Pharaoh's still needed taming, and her beast-taming talent was essential. Then the butler brought something up. "My lord, the annual Golden Eagle Gladiator Tournament is in 1 month. Winning the tournament meant a Golden Eagle crest, free services at shops, discounts at major trading houses, and a favor from the king. The same kind of crest my grandfather Edward had won, and I'd traded away. The tournament only allowed physical combat, no magic. If anyone from my side was going to compete, it'd have to be Norrell. But I decided against entering anyone. My grandfather was once called a sword saint, and he still died in battle. Individual strength has limits in this world. Even the mightiest dragons get hunted down by teams of warriors seeking glory, though plenty of would-be dragon slayers die trying. Building a strong army mattered more than one tournament victory. In a world where war could erupt at any moment, collective military power was what kept you alive. Personal heroics were overrated. I'd skip the tournament. Better to spend that month training more soldiers.